In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
Joe had huge problems with the IRS.
I knew it was coming. I hadn't filed taxes since 1990.
All the IRS letters coming in added up to a nightmare.
It got up to like $68,000. My heart started beating fast. It's like, there's no way, man. I mean, I ain't going to be able to do this.
Then they stopped his paycheck.
So that's when I started making phone calls and found U.S. Tax Shield.
U.S. Tax Shield went to work immediately.
They just took the bull by the horns. What blew my mind is he called the IRS right then and there.
So why is U.S. Tax Shield A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau? Joe knows.
They saved me a ridiculous amount of money.
If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or state, choose the company Joe chose, U.S. Tax Shield.
It was the best decision I made. U.S. Tax Shield is the way to go. Life is good. Thank you, Lord.
Call 800-471-3287.
U.S. Tax Shield. Boo-rah. Yes.
800-471-3287. 800-471-3287.
The Internet will never be the same. You're listening to K98Talk.com.
Whoa! Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Let's get started again.
The following program contains material of an enlightening nature. Open-mindedness is advised.
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damn big that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people of the world, and especially the United States, to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, places, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form. You don't connect the dots. It's just a mass of what's all this about.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
Brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Humans as a species are prone to amnesia. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. It is thus imperative that these all-important matters be thoroughly explored and not left up to blind faith.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
What you are now experiencing is the vibration of air particles being transformed into electrical signals by your senses and DNA, then sent to the brain where they are decoded into sounds. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings. If you missed last week's episode, you can go to our website, www.thesecretteachings.info, and download the show for free from the Secret Teachings archive. Also, on the homepage of the website, you will find a link called Top News, and if you click on that link, you will find a full list of all of the news articles from past shows, as well as some current events that we will be discussing in today's show. Some ongoing stories. We'll be talking current events, everything from the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that just was legalized a couple of weeks ago. Some current events that aren't necessarily getting too much attention in the mainstream or really even in the alternative media. So we will be talking about both of those today on The Secret Teachings. And a little bit towards the end of this first segment, I'll also be joined by Ira Robinson. And the primary reason I wanted to have Ira on the program with me today was because the main topic of today's show, as you may have seen from the promotional headlines, is Planet X, the history of Planet X, what Planet X is, as opposed to what a lot of people fantasize Planet X to be. And we'll also be talking about the Kolbrin Bible, this set of Celtic and Egyptian texts, a couple of thousand years old. And in the Kolbrin Bible, long time ago, when Dimitri Crane was alive, when him and I first got into radio, Dimitri invited me over to his house one night to watch a movie, and we were going to talk about the radio show. And he pulls out, while we're sitting there, I think we were watching Lord of the Rings, and he pulls out this big book while we're sitting there. And if you've never seen the Kolbrin Bible, it's a big book. It's not a regular-sized book. The pages are bigger than your standard computer paper. So it's a really big book, and it's really thick. It's more than a couple hundred pages. And he pulls this book out, and he says, take a look at this. And we flip through the book, and there's a section talking about something called the Destroyer. And in these texts, the Destroyer is described as this object, a type of fire-breathing dragon, for lack of better terminologies in that time period. And this fire-breathing dragon came out of the sky, essentially, at least that's how it's described, and it's seen passing through, I guess you could say, the atmosphere of Earth, and from the tail of this dragon, because the dragon had a tail, as it was breathing fire, you could see another dragon, as they called it, devouring the tail of the first dragon, or at least that's how it's essentially described. And a lot of people, I think, have not heard of the Kolbrin, or they've never heard of the Destroyer. They hear the Destroyer, that sounds kind of science fiction-y, like The Fifth Element or something along those lines. But the Destroyer sounds very, very much like this very infamous Planet X that we hear about so constantly. I know that Planet X seems to be on the minds of most people, especially here on LNM in particular. And there's a lot of other networks out there who really just the listeners really want to focus on Planet X. So today I'm going to give you the Planet X show. No, I'm not holding anything back. I don't need a guest to sit here and describe to me what they saw on YouTube. This is research that I've done. This is information that I've gathered, and as well as Ira, I'll get his take on all of this as well. I'm sure he's got some pretty good insight into what Planet X is, because Planet X could stand for two things. One, X equals unknown, so like planet unknown, the unknown planet. We don't know really what to call it, and you can shout out Wormwood or Nibiru or whatever you might have. Nabaru is another variation of where Nibiru came from, Nibur. Nibura, I think, is another pronunciation. There's just different pronunciations for it. Or X could stand for 10, as in the 10th planet. Now, of course, that would be a little bit confusing to modern astronomy students to mention this to them, because, of course, we don't count the sun or the moon as planetary bodies, and Pluto, as a planetary sphere, was demoted from a planet. So, obviously, we don't have as many planets if we were to count them as the ancient cultures such as the Akkadians or the Chaldeans or the Sumerians or the Ugarit culture. Any of these cultures would have counted the sun and the moon as planetary spheres as well as Pluto. The simple fact that they had any clue that there was a planet that far out in the solar system to the very edge before reaching into some form of intergalactic space is really not necessarily beyond me, but if I was coming into this information without really knowing much about it, it would be pretty beyond me. I mean, think about it for a second. one of two things have to be true about the fact that these ancient cultures, some 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20,000 years ago, knew of the heavenly bodies, and they knew in some cases they were able to describe what these planets looked like or what they were composed of. So when you sit there and think about it, you've either got official history and science that has to be either completely wrong, mixed with a lot of naivety, or you have to have some delusional state of belief to think that these people were very primitive, and yet they were able to make discoveries that for us today as a civilization, we've just made in the last couple of decades. I mean, remember the Dogon tribe in Mali, Africa, who knew about the Sirius star system, knew of a Sirius A and a Sirius B, and a smaller dwarf version of those planets, and knew the weight of the planet, or knew that at least one planet was heavier than the other. How is that possible for a so-called primitive people to have that information? They were either very advanced, and we don't find evidence of their advancements because they were more spiritually advanced, more inner advanced than they were technologically, physically advanced in terms of creating components such as a computer or such as an iPad, is the example I always give. I was actually reading a book the other day, and the author was talking about this exact concept, saying that in some of these channeled sessions and some remote viewing sessions, specifically channeled sessions with other entities from other dimensions, they've said that there are two other, I guess you could say, two other types of souls that exist on this planet, on Earth, at least in this dimensional wavelength, and those are whales and dolphins, and that these creatures are actually far superior to humans. And you might say, well, how is that possible? They don't have iPads. Well, they're more inner advanced than externally advanced. So maybe they don't have, a Holiday Inn, they don't have fancy resorts and fancy sports cars. That's external technological advancement. Perhaps these creatures are much more spiritually advanced. That's completely open to your own interpretation and what you want to believe. The simple fact is, though, a lot of people disbelieve and discount that based on this image that humans are all that is, based on some image of very distorted image of what they perceive God to be. You'll find a lot of channeled sessions with beings from other planetary spheres, other dimensional wavelengths, transcendental types of spirits. They don't like to call God, at least to humans, because their interpretation of God is an energetic power source, not some anthropomorphized being that sits on a cloud with a staff and watches everything you do, like Santa Claus, and puts you on the naughty or nice list, and then Krampus, which is actually a negative aspect of Santa Claus in European lore, or which would be the devil or Satan or Saturn, whatever term you choose to give to this negative energy, this negative source, which is just part of the human psyche, is all that it really is, that we've created, that this being is going to punish you for deeds that if you did them, God would reward you, and if you don't do them, then you'll go and have to burn in hell and all that, all that stuff. For some reason, the devil punishes you for disobeying his enemy. It doesn't really make any sense. But thinking about it, and thinking about all of this, going back to Planet X and the Destroyer, I've never done a show on Planet X. I've talked about the Destroyer on the program before, but many, many, many years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, when I first started radio with Dimitri, we had the Colburn in studio, and we were talking about the Destroyer. And what is so fascinating about the Destroyer that I found, and I'll have some quotations from the Colburn Bible, some notations of where you can look, because I think you can. It's a very ancient text, so you can find it online and read it for free. I'm sure, because the book itself is like $40. It's a pretty big book. If you get a pen and paper, and you can write this down and find it online. But it describes basically the biblical plagues in Egypt, but it describes them in less of a magical way. And see, what magic really has become to us nowadays is Harry Potter. That's magic, a magical wand, Hermione, and all the other characters. That's magic, but that's not really magic. Magic is a sleight of hand. Magic could be, to a very primitive culture, the ability to perform surgery on somebody. You know, I know that the story of Jesus touching a man and all of a sudden he can see, that has nothing to do with physical sight. Maybe it does. It has to do with a more esoteric sight. The man was blind. The man was not part of these sects that Jesus was a part of, for example. So Jesus was in the scene with the white robes and ritually bathed, which is where baptism came from, and the Templars later donned the white robes, the Masons, the white gloves, a sign of purity. And, Jesus in this sect of the Essenes, or the Qumranians, there's so many different names down through the ages, and they actually exist today in modern-day Iran. They trace their lineage back to John the Baptist and not Jesus as the true Messiah. But that's a side note. You have this sect of believers who think that, and it's not literal. They don't necessarily go out and say, okay, look, everybody who's not in the group, not in the clique, they're all dead. But it's symbolic of that, because these people are essentially the proletariat. These people are not necessarily attempting to find or discover or learn higher truths. These people are basically just living their lives in the most mundane ways, just kind of get done with what you have to get done. And of course, in those times, we can't even imagine what it would be like not to have, don't have to go to the grocery store every day. You have to find your own food. You don't just go to a drive-through when you're hungry. It's a completely different concept that we can't even conceive of nowadays. And unless someone built the time machine, or they found the DeLorean and the doc took them back to the past and then back into the future or something like that. I mean, nobody really knows what it would be like back in those days. You can write or talk about it all you want, but you really don't know. So these different sects believe that people outside of their range of knowledge were dead, and once you were initiated, you became alive. You were reborn. That's where the symbolism of the baptism comes from. The waters are kind of like the waters of the womb, and the female, you're reborn and rebirthed. Of course, looking out over the ocean, you can see the rising sun and the bloody red sky, the birth of the sun each morning, part of a smaller cycle within a larger cycle within a larger cycle. And of course, the earth standing for the womb, or the cave, or the grotto, where Jesus was laid, and he was actually born, not in a manger in some type of stable, but it actually was in a cave. And the Mithric rite actually used to celebrate or have their somewhat of I guess you could say, a meeting, their get-togethers in a type of cave as well. I mean, that's where the Vatican, as a matter of fact, was built, on this old Mithric sacrificial caves. So once you were initiated, you were healed. I mean, if you were sick, another definition of being dead, you were sick because you were perverted by the ways of the material world. Once you gave all of that up, you were healed again. If you were blind because you did not subscribe to higher truths, if you will, trying to explain it as easy as possible, then you were blind to those higher truths. You were essentially, you might as well be dead. So Jesus initiating you would create a sense of sight. The deaf, the lame, allowing anybody who have these ailments to transition to a higher state of being. That's what it really was, and you were reborn into this understanding, into this sect. So, in looking, I get very far off track very quickly, but in thinking of that, it's if you go back to what I was saying about healing the blind. Let's say I give the example that if you were to look at that story and think that magic to us nowadays is Harry Potter, magic to somebody 1,000 years ago could have been LASIK surgery. That would be, they wouldn't have any way to even describe that. I mean, there would be absolutely no way for them to describe that in their language. It would just be magic. They would have no way to describe these massive flying craft if there were maybe beings from another world or from this world, monitoring their developments here on Earth. And there's these massive crafts. The Indians called them the Vimana. And what would they call them? Well, they didn't call them aircraft. They didn't say that they looked like a commercial jet because they didn't have that then. So they called them what they had. They called them flying cities. Or they called some of them, metal birds or shiny birds. That's all that they had to describe. They'd associate it with something that they knew. And when I look at Planet X, again, going back to Planet X has this magical mystique about it. And one of the primary reasons I think that is because so many people seem to be so fascinated with it that there is twice as much misinformation, and it's not all on purpose, about Planet X than there is about almost anything else. It's celestial. It's big. It's the out there. It's the solar system. It's the galaxy. It's something that is unknown, as in the X of Planet X, if we can use the X to define the unknown in this sense, that really fascinates people. And maybe there's other reasons people are so obsessed with Planet X. And whatever the case is, I just hope that you enjoy today's show, because we are going to get into all of that. And what I was going back to about the Destroyer is what I was trying to describe a little bit ago, is that when the dragon came in and they're describing these plagues in Egypt, you know, that it might sound like magic, that God in the heavens, you know, Moses called down these plagues from the heavens. But think about it for a second. That could seem like magic, but if you look at the deeper understanding, it's not necessarily magic. It's only magic until you understand it. Then it becomes science, basically. And what these dragons really are, at least the way that I see it, are defined in the Kolbrin, and they call it the Destroyer. And of course, they still didn't describe it how I interpret it, but the way that I see it is that these objects are some form of comet, some sort of asteroid, some sort of massive object that is partially maybe passing through the atmosphere. And as it passes through the atmosphere, it breathes fire. And the tail of the object, whether it's a comet or it's some type of meteor, the tail lights up with smoke and with flames, and another comet or another asteroid, and there's a difference, comes in behind it, consuming the tail, the smoky, dusty fire trail of the first object, devours that trail and follows it. Now, whether these objects struck the Earth or not is really, it's not even a matter of making a point. The fact is, the description outside of the biblical texts describes the same event in the Bible. So I'm not saying, hey, put down those Bibles, it's wrong. It's the same event. It's just described in more magical, godly, heavenly terms. But in the Kolbrin, it's described more scientifically. And I remember that when I did the show on the Destroyer before, it was really interesting to me because I talked about how I thought that maybe some of the plagues, some of them, not all of them, could have been brought about, for example, from diseases or from some type of microbe that had been frozen in the dust, in the ice of this object, and when it passed by the Earth and it kind of burnt up in the atmosphere, or it got kind of left in the planetary orbit of the Earth, and the Earth goes through that these spores, this virus, this whatever it is, gets absorbed into the atmosphere, and people become sick. And I said that was perhaps the cause of many plagues over the years. And we can say, well, aliens created the bubonic plague. Well, it was extraterrestrial. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a group of grays or pink or black-eyed children or reptilians or praying mantises or whatever other species like reptilians you want to label. It could be extraterrestrial. It came from space. And I remember the next morning, actually it was that same morning, it was because I did the show at 6 a.m., it was the same morning about 9 or 10 o'clock, there was an article that was posted from some science website on Yahoo News, and they talked about how the bubonic plague, get this, was probably more than likely started because of a passing comet or asteroid, and then the Earth passed through and picked up those spores, which were extraterrestrial in origin and deadly to humans, and it created this plague. So, with that in mind, understand that comets, specifically, have always been kind of an omen. It would essentially be a celestial prediction, interpreted by humans, to the death of a king, to the fall of an empire, to some terrible, terrible disease that would ravage the population, or some famine or drought, something somewhat terrible. That wasn't necessarily always seen as a good thing. So, if you relate that to the Destroyer, and you relate the information about the Destroyer, such as this big, massive-sized object, whatever it was, this large rock, was very large, and it created earthquakes. It created a cataclysm. It created some type of conditions that were described as the biblical plagues. And as a matter of fact, when we get into this information about the destroyer, it pretty much describes the biblical plagues in not the best, not modern day, but very similar scientific terms, very much more simpler scientific terms than the Bible describes it as some form of magic. Now, whether or not you believe that the Colburn Bible is legitimate or real does not matter to me, because the Colburn Bible is physical, tangible, and I have it right here in my hands. And if you say, well, that doesn't prove anything, well, neither does the Bible. They are, in my opinion, both on the same level. And so are any other ancient text. People just take the Bible and say, I saw a sign the other day, and I actually went out down the road here in Boise, and there's supposed to be this Chinese project taking place near the Boise airport here in Idaho, and the Chinese supposedly own all this land. So I went out to check that out not too long ago, and that's where the ice rink is, where I go ice skating, and there's a sign down here, and I usually only saw these in Florida, those great, if you live in Florida or anywhere on the East Coast down in the South, you know exactly what I mean, those signs as you're driving that say, let go of the wheel, let Jesus take control of it, or something along the lines of, if you don't go to church, you're going to burn in hell. You know, that crazy stuff. I saw a sign like that, and it just said it actually said this, and it had a picture of a book with a cross on it. The Bible, complete, absolute truth. And I'm thinking, really complete, even though it's missing some couple hundred books. Absolute. It's not absolute. It's open to complete interpretation by any and everybody. So the people that take it and run with it are very blind. If you're taking the Bible or any other text, even the Colburn, and running with it and saying, this is the absolute truth, no, you are wrong, and that's not my opinion. Let's take it, set the book down, take a step back, take a deep breath, and let's look at it again. And when there comes the time to call the information distorted or incorrect, then just call it as it is, and stop having these faithful palpitations that if you don't believe this specific part, you're going to burn in hell. That is a control mechanism. It's a fear tactic to get you to believe something when your judgment would say otherwise. And these people will say, well, have faith. No, having faith negates understanding. And without understanding, you cannot grow as a person. And that is why it is important, especially on today's show, to mix the biblical plagues with the Colburn destroyer, mix Planet X with the Colburn destroyer, and see how it all kind of correlates together. And by doing that, I promise you that we will have a better understanding of not just the biblical plagues, not just what the Colburn Bible is, if you've never read it before or you've never heard of it, but we'll have a better understanding of Planet X, we'll have a better understanding of history, we'll have a better understanding of so many other things that otherwise would be very distorted and separated, because these texts are kept separated on purpose, when if you put them together, it's a feeling of, oh my goodness, we missing these pieces of the puzzle. And what most people do is, instead of finding the other pieces, they just kind of fill in the edges of the puzzle with like putty or something where the holes are, so they don't have to connect anything else to it. And they say, okay, look, the puzzle's done. No, you've got one square out of a trillion squares. The puzzle is not complete. If you have a puzzle of, let's say you have a puzzle of that famous NASA photograph of Earth with the completely black background from the moon, and all you have is a very small piece of that photograph from the very, very, top left of the picture, where the sky's just black. How can you sit there and say, well, you know what the picture looks like, because all you have is a black square? You do not have anything else. There's no understanding of the other image, and you say, well, just have faith. That black square is what really matters. No, that black square is not what really matters. The focal point of the picture is the blue globe, the dot, Earth in the center, and you'll miss all of that if you focus on the black square. Now, speaking of black squares, I have something else to share with you. as all of you know, I've written 2 books. I've written The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, and The Grand Illusion is approximately 740 pages, and The Grand Illusion consists of 3 parts and 13 chapters. Now, of course, that's a pretty big book for only having 13 chapters, so I kind of titled them more as like sections within parts. And of course, in the book, I go into all different topics. Anything we've talked about in the show is included in the book times 10. And you talk about genetically modified foods, the medical industry, talk about a history of banking, the real reason and cause of the American Revolution, the establishment of central banks, geoengineering, the London Olympics as an energy ritual, the death of Lady Diana, the death of President John F. Kennedy in association with banking and in association with symbolism, and tying that into the history of the Jewish people and where all of this symbolism came from, and anti-Semitism and history and science and mathematics and geometry, sacred geometry. It's all in the first book, The Grand Illusion. And in the second book I wrote, it's a little bit shorter. It's about 263 pages. It's called False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. And it is essentially a history of, I guess, religious symbolisms that we take to be positive in a sense that these are the images that we should worship, and I show you the distorted aspects of those symbols and how you are actually worshiping the very enemy that you are siding with God in a sense to protect you from. And what I mean by that is essentially by using the cross in the traditional sense of the church, what you're actually worshiping is that Saturnistic satanic influence. Not that it's real, but it's the reversed, distorted image of what you think you're actually worshiping or observing. Of course, I cover the history of the Vatican, a history of pedophilia within the church up into modern day. And in the back of that book, my friend Kevin Annett, he wrote a timeline of events from his defrocking from the United Church all the way up to today and the establishment of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, and a little bit more. And there's all kinds of other things in that book, the history of communion, conjuring, esotericisms, symbolisms that are involved within all of that. So that's the second book, and it's a little bit shorter. And I just now finished writing the third book. And the third book is a sequel to The Grand Illusion. As of right now, we're clocking in at over 500 pages, and it'll probably be right at about 600 when I'm done. So it's a sequel to The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception. So in total, The Grand Illusion and this new book will be over 1,200 pages. Lots of information. The new book is called The Persistent Illusion. So you have The Grand Illusion and The Persistent Illusion. And for the first time, I'm going to tell all of the listeners what the new book is about, and then I will tie that in with what I was talking about with Planet X. So the new book is broken down into 4 parts and a little bit easier to understand. There's roughly about 50 chapters. So it's some chapters are a little bit easier to read through. It's not 100 pages like some of the ones in The Grand Illusion was. And it's formatted a lot nicer. I think the images that I provided, the photographs, a lot of them from NASA, for example, and JPL, all of this is very, very well put together, if I can say so myself. Now, the book won't be out for a couple more months probably, but it is being finalized. I'm waiting on some introductions from some authors. And in the book, I broke it down into 4 parts. The first part is kind of a recap, in some ways, of the illusory nature of reality. And it also goes into holographic projections, and it proposes a question about these different holographic projections from, Dubai, the Norway spiral, the 2008 Chinese 2010 Chinese UFOs, which were really just incredible holographic projections. I see. You got images of Elvis Presley performing in a hologram. You've got who else did they got in a holographic form? Michael Jackson, Tupac in a holographic form. So all of that's in there, and there's all images to back all of that up. And the second part of the book, though, I dive into the occult origins of holidays or ancient holy days. Tying all that together, we take a step further into probably the largest section of the book, and that is a history of eugenics, genocide, Agenda 21, Codex Alimentarius, food, water, and the history from Bosnia to Rwanda to Spain, Argentina, the United States, and Canada. Genocide against specifically natives and people that are not necessarily looked at as positive assets of the state, if that makes any sense. And I go into vaccination programs, the Nazi T4 vaccine program, food ingredients, and all just very, very detailed, including cancer, cures for cancer. I had Dr. Leonard Caldwell write me an introduction for that. Aspartame is also tackled once again in much more detail with ways to avoid it. And I had Dr. Betty Martini write me an intro for that. And Kevin and Ed actually wrote me an intro on genocide, and we'll talk about modern-day images of genocide compared to what Raphael Lemkin wanted them to be when he kind of coined the term. And in the fourth part of the book, what I was getting to here in the first segment of today's program, I talked about, and I provided dozens of images from NASA and JPL, as I mentioned, a lot of different topics. And some of the topics ranged from the sailing stones that I uncovered and talked about with Michael Vera on Late Night in the Midlands, and there's some images of that, and what I uncovered with the moon and with racetrack play at Death Valley here in the United States, and how these rocks move essentially, supposedly by atmospheric conditions on Earth, and we see the same objects moving on the moon. And to top that all off, these objects are much larger moving on the moon. That's a topic for another show. But we'll get to that sometime later. I'll do another show on that. But it's included in the new book, The Persistent Illusion. I also talk about Earth as a hollowed out planetary sphere. The moon is a planetary sphere that's hollowed out, and there's a lot of other things in there. Specifically, the Rod Agenda. And I did 3 episodes on the Rod Agenda. They're all available at thesecretteachings.info, and they are occasionally played as filler here on L&M. I know that they got tremendous feedback from those. I did personally in my email as well. And to get to the point, more specifically, I wrote a chapter called Death Moons. And yes, it is kind of modeled after the Death Star. And there's a reason for that. And sun cubes. Now, if you've never heard of sun cubes, this is pretty interesting. If you've ever seen these photographs, they're from NASA. You've got to take a look at these. And I provided them in the book with links to nasa.gov and JPL with these images. And as I say, I provide them in the book, and I was just using this the information about the new book to get to this topic. I just wanted people to be aware of the cube symbolism that's so prevalent throughout religions. If you take that cube, an actual cube, a box, and you open it up, it forms a cross, the symbol of Christianity. The black cube is also worn by the Jews. It's called the tefillin. The black cube is worshipped as the center of attention in Mecca, the holy city, where Muslims pilgrimage to. They walk around this object 7 times. And it's actually in the midst of 2 towers, which is very symbolic. I wrote about that in The Grand Illusion. The black cube is, or any form of the cube for that matter, is present in Marvel movies as the Tesseract. It is the symbol of life in Transformers, known as the Allspark. The cube is also the worshiping center of the Zoroastrian religion, a Persian religion which merged with Mithraism for all intents and purposes, and form the foundational principles of darkness and light, good and evil, the God and the devil for Christianity and other modern religions. That's where they worship the fire gods. The Holy of Holies in Solomon's Temple was essentially a perfect cube in dimensional proportions mathematically. And the cube is also the spaceship-type object that the aliens used to destroy the Earth in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The cube is very important, almost as important as the Death Star in Star Wars. And if you look at the moons of Mimas as a Saturn moon and Iapetus, another Saturn moon, which is actually last week we had Courtney Brown from the Farsight Institute on talking about Iapetus and the kind of ancient resort that they found there, talking about an ancient war. And if you look at these two spheres, they look very similar to the Death Star or the AR from the Terra Papers or the Klerksdorp spheres found in, I think it was southern Africa. They look identical to the Death Star. Now, that doesn't mean, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm saying that look at the moon, it's a Death Star. What I'm saying is that perhaps a very ancient history that we do not have access to as the average proletariat, that this information was taken and used in the creation of the Death Star. It's not that movies create our history. History creates the movies and the stories that we see. That's more along the lines of specifically what I mean. So if you look at some of these images of the sun, you'll see this black cube. I have an image here from SOHO in 2012, two images from SOHO in 2012, both from nasa.gov, and both of them have this image of the sun, two different wavelengths, and you can see this black cube. One photograph, the cube is to the left. Another photograph, the cube has moved up. Two other photographs from 2011 show the cube in the center of the sun, and another one shows the cube at the very top of the sun. Now, perhaps it's an image error. Perhaps it's a glitch. Perhaps it's some type of something on the film, right? That's always the excuse we get. Now, this isn't hair, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a scratch. It's a black freaking cube. And even if you could write this off, to examine the rods that we've seen, in some cases that were photographed by George Adamski in the 1950s near the moon, the rods photographed by Phobos near Phobos, the moon of Mars, in 1989, before they lost contact with the probe. The object that was caught hovering over the surface of Mars that was estimated to be, I don't know how many, 25 miles long, that was taken by Curiosity in 2014. The images taken near the F-ring of Saturn of these large cylindrical rod-shaped craft. They've been photographed all over our solar system. They're not glitches or scratches on the lens or hairs or dirt. There's something else going on here. And I want to bring that information to your attention because while a lot of people are highly focused on Planet X, highly focused on Wormwood and Nibiru, Nabru, they completely miss the information. They miss the facts. They miss the photographs that show that, well, you're right about something, that there are other life forms. That it's not necessarily on Planet X. And just like religion teaches us that you have to go to a church or you have to go through an intermediary between you and God, which is bullshit. You find God yourself. You don't need to pay somebody to help you find God. That's like the guru who charges $1,000 a session to help you get in touch with some new age master that looks just like Jesus. It's all bullshit. All of it. It's a big scam. We're taught scientifically that if life exists, it exists way out there, somewhere else. Just like religions say, well, God is, he's there, but you have to come through us to get to him. He's out there. He's not inside of you. You need us. Science basically says the same thing. You need us. I'm not ragging on science, but it's the same principle. You need us. You can't find life without us. But look, life is right here in our own solar system. I mean, there's so many forms of life on this own planet we don't even understand. It's right here in our own solar system. That doesn't mean that Planet X is something we should ignore. I don't know anything about the truth about Planet X, and neither do you. And if you think that you do, you are living some type of distorted reality, I'm sorry to say, because nobody truly understands this, at least in the proletariat class. There might be a handful of individuals in the upper echelons, and we will talk about this because there have been some remote viewers who have described a similar type of planetary object, not referring to it as Planet X, that perhaps in the future will come into this solar system, and aliens supposedly are trying to protect Earth, and this is why underground bases are being constructed to ward this off. So, with that understanding, and with the information that I've presented you so far, keep this in mind, And I would recommend getting a pen or a piece of paper and a pencil and writing down some stuff today and going back and researching it and looking into it and thinking, more into it and saying to yourself, what do I think of this? Not what have I been told and what does YouTube say? Just log out of YouTube for a second. I'm tired of the YouTube videos, really. No more YouTube for right now. Step back from it and start thinking more in depth. Stop looking at Planet X as being Jesus touching somebody and magically he's cured. Start looking at Planet X in less magical terms, and for lack of a better term, more scientific terms, and saying, okay, Planet X is not so literal. Maybe there's some other information we're missing about it. And by gathering that extra information, then you would perhaps be able to see that it's not so magical, that instead of being magical, it's actually very, very explicitly explained and detailed. We just can't see those details because we're looking for the jelly donut, because we're looking for the guinea pig. We're looking for the petroglyph, the alien gun, the fingernail, the bone, the skull. And we miss credible evidence when it's in our freaking face, ladies and gentlemen. There are cubes. There are cylinders. We don't understand them. They could come from multiple different dimensions. Technology that in 100 years might make sense to us. I also forgot that there's the Borg in Star Trek flying the giant cube. And there was supposedly one, I saw Michael posted this on L&M on the website, that there was this cube photographed over Texas. It's a relatively smaller cube compared to the ones taken next to the sun, but nevertheless a cube. It's it's right in our face. The evidence is right there. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get into a few different topics and current events, and Ira Robinson will be joining us. And as Ira joins us, we will get into a little bit more about Planet X and the Destroyer. And before I bring Ira on, I will talk to you just a moment about the TRC as well, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, because that is just something that's not really getting talked about anywhere in the media. There was one story that I've seen in the New York Times, and I have that article linked up at thesecretteachings.info from the 2nd of June last month. And it says, Canada's forced schooling of Aboriginal children was cultural genocide, says the report. A report finds, and the report is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that formed in 2008. And after a roughly 6-year investigation, their conclusions of the commission was that there was a cultural genocide committed by the church. And I say cultural, the culture specifically geared towards the natives and not necessarily the white men. Looking at the report of the TRC, I mentioned how the report was actually set up by the three factions of the church that ran the residential schools for roughly 100-plus years and killed the children to begin with tuberculosis, medical experimentation, kidnapping them from their parents, and so on. And this was all corroborated, obviously a sterilized version of the truth, but it was nevertheless corroborated by the New York Times and by the TRC. But the TRC was formed by the Anglican, Catholic, and United Churches. Now, it's funny because the United Anglican and Catholic Churches are the ones that ran the school to begin with, that committed the crimes for which they are then put in charge of forming a committee to which they investigate themselves. It really makes your head really kind of spin, and at some point it's so crazy you actually start thinking this kind of makes sense. It's really unbelievable to me. It's difficult to really fathom unless you spend all of your time invested in this. And the same thing is true. I got an article here from the Winnipeg Free Press. Says local United Church minister to be reinstated despite sexual harassment finding. We've seen, two senior archbishops in Minnesota relieved of duty because they supposedly failed to report the actions of Curtis Weimer, a priest at the Archdiocese in Minnesota. And this man, with 20 accounts of felony accounts of child abuse against him, and waiting outside little boys' restrooms, literally, that is what the guy did. This man was allowed to stay in the church and was moved from location to location until he was finally absolved of his duties. Now, in this case, in the Winnipeg Free Press, they report a man named Robert Campbell who was suspended with pay from the church at the beginning of this year. He is going to now return to the church. I think he already has, like a week or two ago. And this, get this, this comes on an investigation that was conducted by the church. That's why he was suspended with pay. Now, Canada's genocide, it's unbelievable to me that anybody can take this seriously, where people that committed the crimes then get to do the investigation. It's like the murderer who rapes and strangles a woman, getting to do the autopsy and deciding that the woman died because she ate too many cheeseburgers and she had a heart attack. It's a complete sterilized version of the truth, and the only reason it has to be conducted anyway is because the evidence has become so overwhelming that they have to, I guess, enact some sort of public display of, we're concerned about this, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Now, it's funny because the TRC was actually chaired by a man who is quoted, actually, as a matter of fact, I'll find the quote for you here in the New York Times article. Let's see here. All right, I got it right here. It's Lee Justice, who's a native of Ojibwa, named Murray Sinclair. And he's one of the first Aboriginal judges in the province of Manitoba in Canada. Now, he said, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a second, he said the Canadian government pursued this policy, the genocide of children, of cultural genocide because it wished to divest itself of its legal and financial obligations to Aboriginal people and gain control over their lands and resources, which is what they did. They would, through the applications for admission, they would literally kidnap children from their parents, force their parents to sign over guardianship to the local priest, basically, or the head of the school. And then they took native land and they sold it off to logging companies. Then they'd sell the trees and whatnot. And I think about it, and I wonder how can something so blatant and so well documented go unknown about for so long? And the reason is because the people that commit the crime get to then perform the investigation for the crime they committed. That's why. The report essentially acted as a whitewash. It was a sterilization. And even though the commission supposedly documented 3,201 student deaths, the New York Times reported that the TRC reported that the research, quote, suggested that 6,000 or more may have died, which is still a sterilized version of the truth, because roughly 50,000 children died in these schools. But by limiting that amount and admitting to the destructive acts that were committed by these institutions, you're able to get away with not purposeful genocide, but cultural genocide based on negligence. Now, Murray Sinclair, the justice in Manitoba who oversaw this commission, he had another position. As a matter of fact, Murray Sinclair chaired the Aboriginal Justice Initiative in 1988 in Canada with the government to specifically, at least quote-unquote, help children on native reserves who didn't have running water or proper means of healthy living. And the proposal for the initiative that this Aboriginal Justice Initiative in 1988 set up was to basically, it's almost an Agenda 21 situation, but it's specifically geared towards children, was to get the help of handing over native children who weren't being taken care of, who didn't have running water and stuff like that, to get them handed over to a newly formed body called the CFS, the Child and Family Services, which is the Canadian branch of the Child Protective Services. So the man that oversaw, literally, try to understand this, the man that oversaw the commission, with the heads of the commission coming from the churches that committed the crimes, this man, unbelievably, who they committed these crimes to get to obtain land, form of Agenda 21, eugenics, sterilization, genocide, mass genocide, all in the name of God, of course. This is the same man who established a couple decades ago the CFS, which is poised to literally kidnap your children. And they targeted natives in that case. And just like the CPS targets minority groups here in the United States. I'm sure the CPS and CFS are intimately tied in some manner. It's the same guy. It's the same exact story on every continent and every nation. And the fact that people tell me, no, you're wrong, it's not true, just go back to bed, it's unbelievable. You know, we were kicked off of Dark Matter, for example, because we didn't have evidence for what we were saying about the genocide. Well, here, is this enough evidence for you now? The New York Times, probably one of the most, conservative, not necessarily politically, but conservative forms of mainstream media we have today, reporting on a story, and now I guess it becomes true because the New York Times posted a headline about it, right? Is that how it works? Either way, though, that information is all linked up at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. When we come back, we will be speaking with Ira Robinson on a couple news stories I have, and then Planet X and the Destroyer, right here on The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and please don't forget to go to the website www.thesecretteachings.info. Help support the show by either purchasing a copy of my books, The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, or False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, or by donating to the program. And all the money that we get goes to helping to produce The Secret Teachings, as I typically have to work elsewhere to make money to be able to sustain myself. The more you help me, the more secret teachings you get, and the more books you get. I'm Ryan Gable, and we will be right back. Stay tuned. In our modern society, a majority of humans have been conditioned not to ask critical questions, not to stand up for social injustices, and in fact have been conditioned to protect those whom oppress them with fear and the promise of safety from some heinous enemy. Most could not conceive of powerful politicians, businessmen, entertainers, and other reputable people like doctors, priests, and the royals having any connection to an international network, a black market for the abduction and selling of children. Those whom are aware typically think that we are dealing with just the sexual perversion of pedophiles, which is a distorted word meaning the lovers of children. But it's more about blackmail, money, and ritual sacrifice. I'm Ryan Gable, host of the Secret Teachings radio show and author of The Grand Illusion, and my new book is False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. In this 250-plus page book, I have detailed how children, even in their teen years, are kidnapped, drugged, and peddled to royal elites. Many young men and women are also sold into sexual slavery, while others are used to blackmail politicians. The trafficking of children is a multi-billion-dollar international trade that is allowed to continue because of fear and the hopelessness instilled by those actions of church, state, and the monarchies. However, the knowledge of this abuse is so well known that the pedophile priests are a common joke in our society. As if it's okay to joke about the abuse of children, but to expose the abusers of those children is somehow seen as more offensive than the abuse itself. In False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, I detail government brainwashing programs from Germany, Argentina, and Spain to the United States and Canada. The kidnapping of children for brainwashing and re-education into state doctrine, and how other children are stolen from their parents by organizations charged with protecting them, such as the CPS, who has a record of abusing or kidnapping children, drugging them, then selling them into slavery. Sometimes the children are even used in rituals where their blood is drank and flesh is eaten. Few authors and fewer radio hosts dare to venture where I have in False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. I will show you how symbols most see as holy are actually very perverted and distorted, how communion is a modern accepted act of blood sacrifice, and how we can bring justice to criminal establishments through common law courts and bring awareness to historical documented crimes of church and state, from genocide in Canada to connections between the Catholic Church and the Nazis during World War II. In False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, I have also disestablished the foundational pillars of the Vatican and detailed Vatican law, which allows priests to openly abuse children. If you want a copy of False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, you can visit thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info, and click on the Shop tab. For a sample of the work, you can email me at rdgable@yahoo.com. That's rdgable@yahoo.com. False Prophets and the Lovers of Children is a 250-plus page book available at thesecretteachings.info. The book will also be available from Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Please don't be afraid of these topics. Be informed.
Have you been looking for answers? Have you been seeking the truth but can't seem to find it? Late Night in the Midlands has the answers for you. Whether you are interested in the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, alternative health information, or just a little hope and inspiration, we have a show for you. Late Night in the Midlands, The Secret Teachings, Open Eyes, Red Pill Reality Show, Brothers at Arms, and many more shows. All here on the LNM network for you to listen to at any time that you want. Everything is free to listen to, and though it is not required, we are listener supported, and all donations are deeply appreciated. You will not find shows like these in the mainstream media. Go to latenightinthemidlands.com to listen. The LNM network, where the truth has no fear. We have a lot of things going on in America right now, for instance, that is very dark and very unfocused. And because of that darkness that's surrounding everybody, and because of that unfocusedness, people are easily manipulated, and they're easily steered into becoming something that they originally never intended to be, and what we as human beings were never originally intended to be. We as human beings are extremely bright, creative forces in the universe. We have so many things trying to hold us down and trying to hold us back from entering into this new place in the universe that's waiting for us. At any moment, we could step forward and say, enough is enough with all of the crap that you're spewing out at us. We want to be human beings. We don't want to be your slaves anymore. We don't want to be held down anymore. We don't want your darkness covering us anymore. We are going to unite against you, the dark masters that are pulling these strings to make us believe that our children are something that they're not, into believing that our children are animals, into believing that our children are things that should be controlled and should be held down and held back and dumbed down and refused answers to the questions that they have in their minds, to suppress their creativity, to suppress who they really are, to suppress the love that they have for everyone and everything around them, and to make them hate and to breed passion in them to go against other people, to raise up arms against other people and go across the seas and start blowing people away just because they're different, just because they're brown, just because they're red, just because they're yellow, just because they're different than who they are, even though there is no difference between any of us other than the culture that we live in and the tenets that we follow. And those things are taught to us. They're not who we are. They're not what we originally were. They're not what we were born to be. They are taught to us. They are driven into our brains. They are forced onto us as a template that they want us to follow, that they want us to be, to not have control over ourselves and follow the party line that they lay out for us, to follow the path that they want us to follow, and to no longer realize that we don't need them to govern us, that we don't need them to control us. We are amazing beings. We are beautiful creations that come from a core of love. We are energy. We are all that there is. We are the consciousness that creates what we see. And because we have been manipulated, because we have been taught to think differently, taught to think that, oh, life doesn't actually matter. Oh, there are no things out there. There's nothing else out there other than us here on Earth. There's nothing else out there. That's a laughable proposition. How can you even think that? Oh, look at that other person over there. They're different than you are. You should hate them. Oh, look at that person over there. They think differently than you do. We should hate them. These are the lies that are destroying us right now.
Get the truth. You look for the truth, and you go no matter where it leads, no matter what it leads to. Everybody's Gary Lee the Mad Martian, and you're listening to The Secret Teachings.
This is Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Far Sight Institute for Remote Viewing. That is www.farsight.org. And you're listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
This is Kevin Annett with the International Tribunal in the Crimes of Church and State, the ITCCS.org, and you're listening to The Secret Teachings.
Good evening and welcome back to The Secret Teachings. I am your host, Ryan Gable. On the line with me, I also have Ira Robinson, who we'll be speaking with here in a moment about Planet X and the Destroyer, as well as some current events in the news. And if you missed the first hour, I kind of went over a little bit of an overview of Planet X as a history and the Destroyer and what we perceive to be magic, and describing, let's say, the biblical plagues compared to the description in the Colburn Bible, and how it explains the plagues as a byproduct of some celestial event that doesn't necessarily resonate so much with the idea of how we perceive magic to be, necessarily in the sense of a Harry Potter or some type of bad B-movie with a wizard. Magic is a sleight of hand, but magic is also a lack of understanding. It is a lack of understanding of certain scientific principles, laws, and scientific matters. And by believing things simply on blind faith, we lack an understanding. And by lacking understanding of whatever it might be, in this case, the idea of a planetary body moving throughout space, Planet X, or any other topic we discuss here on The Secret Teachings, by lacking that understanding, then we are lacking the ability to be able to grow through that understanding, through that experience, by simply believing something based on blind faith. Now, with that being said, let me go ahead and welcome my guest host today, Ira Robinson. Ira, are you on the line with me?
I am indeed. Hello, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Absolutely. It's been quite a while, hasn't it?
It has. Too long.
It has been too long. So what have you been up to? I know I sent you a message about Planet X, and I know most of the people on L&M and other networks really love the topic of Planet X, but maybe today we can give a different type of perspective on what Planet X is, and also get into the Destroyer a little bit.
Yes, definitely. I would love to. The idea of Planet X, I think, has come about mainly as a way to focus people's fears. That's like the biggest thing now that people are so afraid of, and it's kind of drives me crazy. It kind of drives me to distraction, because there's so much other stuff that goes on in this world that really should be paid attention to, that should be fearful of.
And we're focused on this.
But people are focused on this, right?
Right. Well, what I was saying at the beginning of the show, and I was going through my books and taking some photographs from them and going over them with the listeners and showing everybody out there how there's so many images, lots of images, dozens of images from NASA, from JPL, official images, and from some amateur astronomers showing these large cylindrical rod objects near the moon, near Saturn, near the sun, near Mars, all throughout multiple different decades by multiple space agencies from Russia to the United States. All this information is there. All of this information is available. It's freely there. It's not censored in any direct way. And all of that is direct evidence of something occurring right here in our own solar system, not to mention these black cubes and the symbolism behind them being photographed by SOHO near the sun in 2011, 2012, and then supposedly this new black cube that showed up over Texas. I haven't confirmed whether that's a legitimate story or not. But you see these images, it's right there in our face, and instead of focusing on them, we're focused on the jelly donut, or the guinea pig, or the rock that kind of looks like Bigfoot on Mars. We're focused on Planet X, when evidence for the same type of beliefs and feelings people have about Planet X exists right here, and there's photographic evidence of it. But like you said, we're distracted by something that it's just more of a way to dispose your fear into this one object that supposedly is coming to destroy us. It's like people obsessed with Revelations or the apocalypse.
Exactly. For me, it's a thing of, I see it as a form of censorship in and of itself. This disinformation or misinformation is being put out about this thing, Planet X or Nibiru, or however you want to put it, and so people get distracted and sucked into that, as opposed to then seeing what is really happening, like you were discussing there. There are those things there. There is evidence in existence that something is happening in the here and now in our faces, but we're being distracted away from it and being led away from it into these honeypots that they lay out.
Mm-hmm.
And people get trapped in it. And it's unfortunate because there is so much disinformation that's put out about the whole Nibiru Planet X deal that you can't find the truth in it anymore. It's impossible to find any truth in it anymore.
There's a tremendous amount of disinformation. And
it's insane.
That's why I said at the beginning of the show, turn YouTube off and just get a piece of paper and a pencil and let's just start this whole thing over again.
You really have to at this point, because so much stuff has been put out about it. And I would venture a guess to say that at least 99.5% of it is just complete bull. Just completely off the cuff. Let's make up the weirdest, craziest crap we can imagine, and people are going to just suck it up. They're going to just buy it up and suck it up. So much money goes into this whole thing. They make a killing at it. Just as an example, on YouTube, on average, if you're a YouTube partner, you'll make about, depending on the video, but you'll make approximately 1/10 of a cent for each view that you get on a video. Okay, just as an example. So if your video that you have put out, and that you're putting out this video that's about Nibiru or whatever, and you're going to get 100,000 views, well, right there you just made $1,000 off of that video. You see what I mean? There's a lot of money that's involved in it. People are selling books like crazy about it all. I mean, there's just, again, so much of this disinformation that's put out there just simply for the profit margin alone, let alone everything else.
and all of the people out there that buy into it, and I'm not saying buying a book on the subject is wasting your money. What I'm saying is by buying into whether it's financial or it's just emotional or whatever the case might be, you're buying into people who really don't care and who are using the information essentially against you to mock you just to make a profit off of the faith you have in this. It's the same thing with religions is basically all that it is. It's making a profit off of faith.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like with L. Ron Hubbard starting Scientology because he made a bet with somebody saying that the best way to make money is to start a religion. So he made a bar bet with somebody as to whether or not this would be successful or not, and he won. He started Scientology, and now this is a huge business. But that's right there, proof of how this kind of stuff really does work. You go into as well, I think, the more psychological reasons for this occurring. And once in a while I talk about how people get addicted to emotions. They get addicted to like the negative emotions or the state of fear, that type of thing, because it really is an addiction. It's like heroin. You get this emotional high off of being afraid and then coming down when nothing ends up occurring. So people, they know how the psychology of people really work, the general masses of humanity, that kind of herd mentality, I guess you could say. They know that they will get a certain percentage of the population sucked into the fear because people are addicted to this fear. So they'll put out this information saying, in September, there's going to be these major events that are occurring. Oh my God, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. But then at the same time, the people then they start looking up all this information. They are searching everything out. They're getting more and more afraid. September comes around, nothing happens. They get on this,
everybody's depressed
we're free,
about it.
Everything is okay now. Some of them will get depressed, some of them will get happy because everything is okay. There's different states that end up occurring, whatever your addiction is. And then 2 months later, once you've gotten done riding the culmination of that high, you start seeking out the next high. That's exactly how it occurs over and over.
So
That's
it's just
why
like a drug
we
addict.
keep seeing these things. Yes, it's exactly like a drug addict. It is a drug. I mean, these emotions that we have, our bodies, they're pretty fascinating pieces of machinery. But these chemical compositions that are released into our bloodstream by our different endocrine systems, when we feel an emotion, they do have an addictive factor to them. The brain gets addicted to these endorphins that come through with these different emotions. So you get people who are addicted to relationships. They'll be addicted to an abusive relationship because they go through that cycle of abuse and they go through that cycle of fear, relief. Again, it's that addiction. That's why they can't leave the person. It's not out of a state of, I don't know what's going to happen to me afterwards. They invariably come out and say, well, I love him. I don't want to leave him. And it's because they're addicted to those emotions that are going on. The Stockholm Syndrome is another great example of it. I know you know what that one is, but that one is another example of how an emotional addiction can occur. These things are very powerful in our bodies. And people know this and they take advantage of it. And I think that's what we see in this whole Planet X thing, primarily as the driving force behind it.
Well, a lot of this information came out of the book series by Zecharia Sitchin. And
yeah.
I think a lot of what he wrote, and I've read some, I haven't read all of the books in the Earth Chronicles, but I've read a good portion of them. And what he wrote, a lot of it was based on like legitimate interpretations, and a lot of it was also kind of pushing the boundary a little bit, a little fantasizing, and then taking that fantasizing that he wrote, people kind of add their own fantasies to it, and it blows up into the, I call it a problem in a way, the problem that we have today associated with this idea of a Planet X, a Nibiru, a Wormwood. You know, these are all different names that essentially have different definitions, but they all kind of get grouped together into one, you know, type of belief system. It is very much like a religion. And that's why when CNN reported, for example, how there was a planetary body perhaps far outside our solar system that was exerting a very heavy gravitational effect on many planets in our solar system, people didn't really say anything because they didn't use the words Planet X. They just said an outside planetary body. There were some people that said this might be Planet X, this might be Nibiru. But the point is, since the news, the CNN report, did not include the word planet and the letter X, nobody really said much about it. Rather, they take YouTube videos that somebody put up to make money and use that as evidence. And I'm being dead serious. I know there's some truth on YouTube. Shut YouTube down, because you might find a little bit of truth. You're going to find, like you said, Ira, 99.5% disinformation and deception. Not that it's intentional, not that, you know, the government's blocking out Google images. It has nothing to do with it. The fact is people are making money off of this, and this is more of a kind of a scam that operates in the lower echelons of society. It really, to me, has nothing to do with some government involvement. But people say, oh, they're spraying chemtrails to block the sun out so we can't see Planet X. No. I mean, maybe they are, Ira, but that kind of mentality, grouping that together with no evidence and just believing it because you read it online, literally, or believing it because you saw it in a YouTube video, you're missing the point entirely, and you're being completely distracted away from what actually matters. And besides that, all the people that are so obsessed with this Planet X figure, Ira, they don't really understand the history of it or where this information even came from. And as a matter of fact, do you remember there was a woman, and this got mainstream media attention. I cannot remember the name of this woman. I think she was in the Midwest somewhere. She claims that she came up with the idea for Planet X. And the mainstream media picks up on the story in order to discredit people who look into the evidence as we do about whatever this object is. And they said, don't worry, Planet X is just the fantasizing creation of this woman. And I'm thinking, even at the very minimal, no, it's not, because Zecharia Sitchin wrote about that decades before this woman ever came front with this story.
Exactly. You know, when you were talking about YouTube there, just as an example of the amount of things that get put out onto YouTube every day, every minute, according to Google statistics themselves, every minute over 300 hours worth of video is uploaded to YouTube.
That is a lot.
That's a lot. You know, I mean, that's every minute, 300 hours. You're never going to watch the amount of stuff that's on YouTube. You cannot sit and just watch from one video to the next and ever get through YouTube. But in that statistic is very telling how much disinformation gets put out there as well. You can't have 300 hours worth of truth put out onto YouTube every minute. It's just impossible to do. You know, it's not going to happen. The thing with Planet X and Nibiru, again, you were just describing it right there, that people don't know the history of where it originated at. People don't know the history of who has been behind this thing pushing this idea forward. So much of the people that have been there at the forefronts of the Planet X issue have been discredited over the years as being complete shills and frauds. Just absolute 100% shills. If you take that into consideration and you even look at the field and there's 10 people that are there, and one person out of that field is there telling the truth, you know, you're going to have a very difficult time cutting through the amount of BS that's put out about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good BS out there. There's a lot of stuff where you can make certain symbols or certain stories or certain people link together when they clearly do not to somebody who is more or less trained in that area of observation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You have to get to the history of it. And that's one thing that I like about your show in particular, is that whenever you do a topic, you really do the research into the history of what's going on with that topic, no matter what it is. And I love that about you. That I think that more people need to do exactly that. If we had that more often, maybe we'd have a few less problems and a few less disinformation out there, because people would start recognize and calling the BS when they see it.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, I did a lot of research on Planet X. I wrote about it in The Grand Illusion, and I did a little bit of research in the Colburn Bible for today in relationship to the Destroyer that we'll get to here in a little bit. Before we do that, though, I wanted to go through the name, at least, a little bit with you, Ira, of what Planet X, or Nibiru, what it actually means. And Planet X could stand for several different things. For example, X means, or at least denotes, something that is unknown. So you could say that Planet X is the unknown planet.
Right. It comes from the idea of, with mathematics, with algebra, X is the X factor. It's the unknown. They just use it as a placeholder.
That's exactly right. So X is the placeholder for the proper name of this planetary body. You could also say that X denotes the number 10 in Roman numerals. And then you think, well, what planet 10, what does that mean? Well, 10 planets in our solar system, 9 planets, plus this planetary body, Planet X, is 10 planets. And then you look into Zecharia Sitchin's work, and you see that he calls it the 12th planet. And people might wonder, well, why would you call it the 12th planet? I mean, at the very least, it would be the 10th planet, not the 12th. Well, for modern astronomers, you don't really understand that the ancient cultures, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the cultures of Ugarit, the Chaldeans, they all looked at the stars in a different way than we do today. They actually claimed that our sun and our moon were both planetary bodies, or were both planets. So when they counted the planets in the solar system, first of all, you have to get over the fact that how are these ancient cultures 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago calculating planetary bodies in our solar system, names, descriptions, and where they were located, millions of miles away from them carving a rock or a stick. At least that's if official history holds. So by getting over that and thinking, okay, they were looking at the planets, and they say there's 9 planets, but Planet X is a 10th planet, so that's why they might call it Planet X, the 10th planet, Planet 10. Or it's also called the 12th planet in some regards, because there's 10 planets, including Planet X, plus the sun and plus the moon, gives you 12. However, this has caused a lot of confusion recently, because one of our planets has been demoted. Right, Ira?
Yep, poor Pluto.
Pluto's been demoted. So now Planet X becomes essentially the 9th planet, minusing Pluto, plus the sun and the moon gives you 11 planets. So Zecharia Sitchin's work, the 12th planet, to modern-day students doesn't really make any sense, and therefore is easier to discredit, because what are you talking about? There's only 9 planets now. Even if you include Planet X, Pluto's not a planet anymore, and it really distorts the field of research that much further. Personally, I think there's some legitimacy to what we're talking about. That's why I'm doing a show on the subject. The problem is, I think that the reason, personally, I think that there's a partial kernel of truth in this or misinformation, is that one of the reasons Pluto was demoted was simply because of this association with this information coming out in the modern day. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a few minutes, but if you have a comment, go ahead.
Well, you're on the right track, I think, and I'm in agreement with you that I'm not saying that there is no Nibiru or Planet X or anything along those lines. I'm just trying to get across the idea that what we see out there as far as information being put out, you've got to cut through the amount of disinformation that's put out regarding this subject so that you can find the truth about it, because there is some truth to it. There is something that's going on that we just don't know or understand, and we're being led astray from what the truth is. I think that the truth is actually more fascinating and more important than the idea of some planet coming through here every 3,600 years and causing our destruction to happen.
That's right.
I mean, we if you just look back in history, we've got still records from 3,600 years years ago, there was not all this stuff that went on there. I mean, it's, I don't know. People just kind of gloss over that. But anyways, I think that one thing that's important to look at too is that at the same time period that they removed Pluto from being a planet and started causing this kind of confusion to go on, they also added in the new zodiac system, adding in Ophiuchus, the 13th zodiac symbol, which also caused a lot of confusion as well. This all happened right at the exact same time period.
But not ironically that symbol is the serpent. So
exactly.
We've been deceived once again by the trickster, perhaps, Ira.
There you go. Exactly. The serpent has always been that kind of symbol for that entity, that being.
If you look at Planet X, what's the other names we hear for it, Ira? Nibiru.
Well, you hear Nibiru, you hear Wormwood. Let me see here. There's the Destroyer, which I think actually they kind of get from the Kolbrin. Boy, oh boy, there's a few others that I've heard as well, and
those are the big ones, though.
Yeah, those are the big four right there, though.
Yeah. So Nibiru is probably one of the most well known, I would assume. And just to go into a little bit of the history of Nibiru, it supposedly means planet of the cross scene. And this is important in relation to a subject we'll get to in a second about where the name Nibiru even comes from. It supposedly, as you mentioned, Ira, has a 3,600-year orbit, and it actually, at least in descriptions, supposedly has a type of wings or a halo which you could associate with having, I guess, a type of ring like Saturn. So having wings or a halo could be the association that this planetary body has rings, or perhaps is, I've heard in some descriptions, a type of almost miniature solar system that kind of moves throughout space, and that this object has either, so much debris that goes along with it, or it has its own moons. Now, the reason that is important to understand, at least scientifically and historically, is because regardless of what you think about planet Nibiru, a couple of years ago, I remember a report from Live Science and Discovery News. They reported how there was not only planetary bodies that were discovered, void of a host system. They were traveling planetary bodies, and some of them actually had their own moons. Now, on top of that, this asteroid that passed by not too many months ago also had its own moon. So it's not too inconceivable to think that if there's some truth to what we're discussing about this planetary sphere, this Nibiru Wormwood Planet X, that it could also be a wandering planet and have its own moons, because modern science has confirmed those previously laughed at, the bits of information that came out of these descriptions.
Yeah, exactly. You also see one bit of information that came out just a couple of weeks ago at this point. They have found an exoplanet in a solar system. I believe it's one of the Gliese solar systems that they were looking at. One of the exoplanets there actually has a trail that it's leaving behind because its atmosphere is being slowly burned off by the sun. And so as it is moving through its solar system, it's leaving almost like it's a cometary trail. And when you look at it, if you were to look at that from a frontal perspective, you could see how maybe some people would see something like that in the sky and think that it had a halo or a set of wings to it.
True.
So, I mean, something like that could be occurring with what people saw in the past as well. One thing that I've come up with as an idea, or what I try to put forward as a possibility, is that in the past maybe we did have some kind of a rogue planet that went through our solar system that did have these properties to it, that did cause problems here in our solar system, but that doesn't mean that it's a object that's in our solar system or is part of ours. We're in a very big universe. We're in a very dirty universe. There are a lot of things that are around that are still causing us issues. We're part of this galaxy that's spinning around in circles, right? So we have the fact that we're moving in the perspective of the galaxy itself. We're also at the same time not even part of the Milky Way ourselves, according to science. We're from a different galaxy that has collided with the Milky Way at this point in time. So, you toss that into the fact as well. All of these different factors, they add up to the fact that we are in this universe, or this section of the universe that has a lot of debris in it, has a lot of different particles and planetary leftovers and debris and everything that's left over. It's a big possibility that, yes, something did occur in the past, but that doesn't necessitate that it's going to happen again in the future.
Yeah, that's also actually, I got a good example for that. You look at California, and what have you always heard about California and earthquakes? That there's going to be the big one, and you actually saw that movie San Andreas that came out recently.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, on that topic, there was a couple of people I was speaking to, and this was as the movie was coming out, I think that week, so this was a couple weeks ago, and they said, "Oh my God, did you hear that there's supposed to be a really big earthquake in California?"
Oh yeah,
on that Friday, and I'm sitting there thinking, Friday. Like, the movie comes out Friday. I said, that is just a PR stunt to get people to watch the movie.
You got it. That happens over and over and over again. It's part of their marketing strategy. They make these things go viral to get this stuff more popular.
Yep, that's all that it was. now, on that note,
let me toss this in as another side effect here as well. When the movie Carrie, the remake of the movie Carrie was coming out, there were a bunch of videos on YouTube that were showing people having like these telekinetic experiences over and over, and these huge, vastly popular videos started growing. There were ones that were getting millions of hits. Look at this. This is proof right here that telekinesis exists, and on and on and on. And turns out it was just a marketing stunt for the movie Carrie to make it more apt for people to go and watch this movie. It's part of their new marketing strategies. There are 7,000 different public relations firms in the United States alone, and they all do this kind of thing. They do this for a living.
That's right. That's their job, buddy. That's what they do. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just about making money, going back to the YouTube videos. I guess it is a conspiracy in one way, but it's not the associative conspiracy that we would think about guys in black suits sitting at a table making deals with aliens.
Right.
In relation to the movie San Andreas, as a matter of fact, you always hear about this big earthquake that's going to split California off. And it's based on past historical events. It's based on, I guess you could say, like geological maps of the future and estimates based on patterns. And when you look at that, you think we're constantly, like, it's really something else that people are really scared about. Earthquakes happening in California, sinking into the ocean, maybe Florida as well, but specifically California. And historically, California is overdue, based on our models, scientifically, for a major earthquake. But they're a couple decades past that point of being overdue. Does that mean that earthquakes haven't appeared in the past? No. Does that mean that the models are incorrect? Not necessarily. The pattern might just be, changing a little bit, and we just don't see that because it's part of a much larger cycle that we haven't experienced yet.
Yeah.
Relating
as another example, tossing in this as well, if you look through geologic history that we know of, or at least that has been found so far, you look through the different patterns of extinction events that have occurred over the years, and you see that approximately every 65 million years or so, there's a big event that occurs that basically all of life on the planet experiences these huge extinction level events every 65 or so million years. Well, we're actually past the 65 million year at this point in time, but that doesn't mean that tomorrow something is going to occur that's going to make an extinction level event happen.
That's right.
65 million years in the category of geological terms is a vast amount of time. 2 decades in geologic terms is just a fraction of a hair. It's nothing compared to the depth of time that's there.
Not to mention, it's not like scientists found a rock that was carved with the name Arg 65 million years ago, and some guy inscribed on there that there was an asteroid about to hit and prepare for this in another 65 million years. It's an estimation based on the data that they have. So 65 million years, you say, okay, every 65 million years there should be a mass extinction. We're like 100 years over that. 100 years, even 100,000 years, is not really that far off from the estimate that's given, because the estimate is only an estimate. It's not an exact in-stone fact that as soon as the calendar reaches 65 million years, boom, everything gets wiped out. It's not necessarily like manufactured clockwork. It may be a natural cycle, but it's not necessarily something that's a manufactured clockwork. It's guaranteed to happen. It might be part of a different type of cycle, and being off by a couple thousand years even might seem preposterous to us because we only live maybe 100 if we're lucky. We can't even comprehend that. We think things have to be absolute in the world that we live in. And when taking that information, Ira, and applying that to Planet X, just like the earthquake in California, just because we're like 100+ years overdue for that, or the mass extinction, we're a couple 100,000 years overdue for that, doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. We're just basing this information off of the data we already have, and the problem with that is the data we know is very kind of shaky and kind of incomplete, and yet we base the conclusions as being these absolute facts, and that's what causes a lot of the confusion and a lot of the problems. So people say, oh, scientists don't know what they're talking about. They've got no clue when it's going to hit California. Well, no, they don't. I mean, you could predict it to a certain extent. There's been we interviewed Eric Dollard about this Tesla technology to predict earthquakes, but it's not something you can predict months in advance. It's something that you might have hours to predict, if even that. So 65 million years for a mass extinction or 100 years overdue for an earthquake is not necessarily breaking any form of, you could say, prophecy or prediction. And I only say that because relating it to Planet X doesn't mean that just because we didn't have a cataclysm 3,600 years ago doesn't mean that that's not some type of 65 million year estimate where this object should come into play. Perhaps, Ira, a couple thousand years ago, 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, there was a catastrophe, and there was described in the Colburn Bible. Now, perhaps they heard a story that with the beginning of time, something like this happened again. 3,000 years prior to that, something like this happened again. So they estimated it roughly to 3,600 years. Then you get people like Sitchin who interpret it, probably incorrectly, puts his own spin on it, and then people kind of look at it in the modern day and like, okay, 3,600 years as if it was etched in stone. It's not. It's an estimate. It could be another 1,000 years. This thing could be out there. That doesn't mean just because the estimate is not accurate that the object does not exist.
Right, exactly. And if you look at the work that Sitchin put out and the words that he spoke, in interviews when people would ask him, he would state flat out, no, we're nowhere near the 3,600 years at this point in time.
Oh, well, you have to.
So he himself said that.
You have to write so many things into that because you have to. There's so many assumptions, aren't there, Ira? Because you have you have to put into play the differencing in calendars. You have to put into play the possibility that if there is an object out there that's not intelligently controlled, that this object might, collide with another object and be taken off course, whether that's permanently or by another 10,000 years. Space is pretty big if you haven't made that realization yet. It's not like it's in your backyard and you're waiting for the planet to come around and hit your house. It's massive. We're talking billions of miles.
That's one thing that drives me nuts when people start latching on to the asteroids that come in or whatever, and they talk about, oh, this asteroid's going to hit us, it's going to be close to us, and oh my God, we're all going to die, and yet it was 9 to 11 million miles away from Earth, or it's 3 moon orbits away from us. That is a vast amount of distance between us and it. Speaking on planetary terms, yes, that is a close or a near impact event, but when it comes to actually the nuts and bolts of it, that is so far distant that it may as well not even have occurred.
That's right.
But people latch onto it and get into that fear factor and so on and so forth, like we were discussing earlier.
So so the people that believe in Planet X and whatnot, I'm not against you, but I'm not with you either. What I'm trying to do is to break it down, and I'm taking a rolling pin and I'm just trying to smooth out the edges a little bit, if that makes any sense. I just want people to understand the history and understand that even though we see the history, it's not discrediting what we're talking about in terms of Planet X, but it's also not necessarily supporting it as an absolute. These are estimates, and this is information that comes about from research and not from YouTube videos, if that makes any sense. So the planet Nibiru, I read a book one time called Ancient Etymological Correlatives. Have you ever heard of this?
It sounds familiar to me. I don't know if I've ever read that one or not.
The subtitle is The Gateway to Knowledge. It was written by a researcher named William Beattie, Beattie.
Okay, yeah, I think I have read that one a long time ago.
It was a self-published book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a self-published book. It was a relatively skinny book. When I read this, he described Nibiru, but in much different terms than I had ever heard before, because he obviously did a lot more research than I had. And he described it as Nibiru, coming from the Sumerian word Na-ba-ru, N-A-B-A-R-U, at least loosely translated into our English, Na-ba-ru, which became Nibiru. And he says that Nabaru comes from the word A-ba-ra. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's A-A apostrophe B-A-R-A, A-ba-ra. Now he says Abara means to cross. Means to cross, just like Nibiru means planet of the crossing. So, at least in that respect, when Sitchin translated that, it was on point, at least according to William Beattie. And the word Nabara, so adding one N into that with the Sumerian word Nabaru and the word Abara, you get Nabara, which is very similar to Nibiru, which means to cross or we cross. Nabaru means we cross. Now, he also says that the Sumerian word Nabaru can also be translated not strictly into Abara, meaning to cross, or Nabara, meaning we cross, but Nabaru can be translated to meaning the moving light gate. Therefore, Ira, he says that Nibiru may not actually be a planet. Instead, it might refer to what he calls, and I quote, an interplanetary travel, a stargate. So have you ever heard of that particular theory?
I have indeed. And I actually find that to be more of a valid idea, I guess you could say, than a rogue planet coming in every 3,600 years and destroying us. I think that there is actually a lot more to it, to that idea, when you consider the things that the Sumerians had to say about their origins, about who came to visit them, who came and were their quote-unquote gods, so on and so forth. I think there's actually more of a valid idea behind the case that there was some kind of a portal that opened that allowed these things to cross into our area. I think that, honestly, when you look at what's happening today with things like CERN, where they have literally said that they are trying to open up a portal between dimensions to take a peek and see what's on the other side, I think that may be exactly what happened back then. That this other group of beings perhaps had something along these lines of technology. And just like Arthur C. Clarke said, any technology sufficiently advanced would be indistinguishable from magic.
Exactly. That's what I was talking about in the first part of the show. Exactly. That we see it as magic until there's an understanding of it. It's just it's magic. It's the work of God. It's the work of angels. It's a miracle.
So they called them gods because to them they were gods. And if you went back with, I like how Michael Vera on his show puts it. Sometimes if you were to go back with a cell phone in time and take a picture of somebody, you've captured their soul. I don't know. Maybe that was you that said that. Either way, though, you take a picture of them and you've captured their soul.
Yeah, Michael said that. I've used other similar examples, but that was definitely credited to Mr. Vera.
Okay.
Speaking of gods, though, actually, Ira, I'm glad that you brought that up because more confusion comes into play. It's not intentional confusion. It's confusion that comes about because if you look at, let's say, Planet X, a Nibiru, it's also associated with different gods, which are associated with kings who act as intermediaries or emperors.
Yeah.
So in Babylon, their chief god was named Marduk, and Marduk was the name that they gave to certain planetary spheres. So by relating that name to planetary spheres and to a physical, chief ruler and to a god, then it kind of morphs together this physical human into a intangible spiritual godly figure and into a tangible planetary body, thereby creating more confusion. And the Assyrians actually called this same deity Ashur, which even confuses people more because now you've got the Babylonians calling it Marduk, you've got the Assyrians calling it Ashur, you've got names like Nibiru, Nabaru, you've got names like Planet X, which could mean the unknown, it could mean the 10th planet, but why is there 12 planets? That doesn't make any sense. It's the sun and the moon. There's so many different variations. And then, of course, you have other names which are probably not related to Nibiru, but a lot of people make the disassociation, or the accidental association, rather, with Maldek. And if you ever read M. Don Shorn's work in the Journals of the Ancient Ones, he clearly shows you that Maldek is a completely different planetary body than Nibiru or Wormwood. Maldek is a planetary body that comes in and wreaks a type of havoc on Tiamat, which was in between the asteroid, or it was the asteroid belt. That's what the remains of Tiamat is, or perhaps Earth is also. We are the remains of the people that lived on Tiamat. You have to read his work to get into more detail, but
it's fascinating.
It is, and Maldek. I'm just trying to say that Maldek is used as a name for Nibiru, but Maldek does not have anything to do with Nibiru. It's a completely separate body. So by naming gods and kings after these planetary bodies and then associating them with loosely based information and assumptions on other planetary spheres that are historically documented and scientifically documented, it creates that much more confusion, which is why we need to, once again, shut YouTube off and let's start over.
Right. When you take a look into, like, move it a little bit forward from that point in time, you see that people, even today, name their children after famous figures because they want them to have some kind of association with that famous figure. Moving ahead as well, you can see how the pharaohs would be mythologically associated with the gods. They would be ascended into godhood and become gods themselves upon death if they were successfully traversing the underworld. You look at the you look on the building in Congress. The Capitol building there in Washington, D.C. You see that George Washington is figured in there in the clouds wearing a purple robe and surrounded by rainbows and so on and so forth. He's become elevated in status to almost godhood. This kind of thing has been done by us human beings throughout our entirety of history, where we try to associate our famous figures with these gods. We try to ascribe godhood into them. So that if we do that today, how much more did they do it back then? You know?
And so how much confusion does that
cause? It wreaks a massive amount of confusion. I mean, you see that today. You know how many people look at people's names and say, "Oh, you named your child Jesus." No, it's Jesus. You know, I mean that we see
that's
it
right. Good example.
Over and over. It's a great amount of confusion that gets tossed in.
So, with all of that confusion, let me ask you, Ira, where do we stand then on the issue of Planet X, of Nibiru? How do we approach this situation, knowing that there's some type of kernel of relevance to it? There's a kernel of truth somewhere. How do we find that kernel, and how do we decipher what it really means with all of these bits of disinformation and all of this purposeful misinformation?
Well, you have to return to zero. I honestly believe that that's exactly what it takes. You have to erase everything out of your mind and go from a fresh perspective into the whole ordeal. If you want to take a look at the history that's come through all of it, start at zero. Start with actually doing the research yourself. Take the time to interpret the words yourself. You know, educate yourself. There are education programs that are out there that can teach you how to read these different languages, for instance. Just like when you research, if you want to really be a good Christian, go into reading the Bible from the original language yourself and not the interpretations that other people have put forward. Educate yourself. Do it from ground zero forward. I think that's really the only way that we're going to be able to cut through any of it, because there is so much different disinformation that's put out. Kind of sequester yourself away from getting any kind of information in that's a quote-unquote modern way of thinking, because that's going to be guaranteed to be possibly tainted by people's interpretations of this.
Well, definitely, because you have to – I actually mentioned this in the beginning of the show. If you look at a story like The Destroyer and you see that they called it a great dragon, to most modern humans, they think dragons don't exist. That's only in video games and movies and TV shows. Well, that's the only word that they had to ascribe to what they witnessed. So in trying to understand what was actually seen 4,000 years ago, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, we have to apply their understanding of it and use that information to kind of work backwards from our modern perspective. And this is why when we see stories about cultures or tribes that say they have these bird gods, well, bird gods is the only way that they could describe more advanced humans, more advanced than their primitive tribe, and not in a derogatory sense, I use the word primitive, coming down and flying in planes or helicopters or something along those lines. Those have wings. Birds have wings. It's basically the same concept, so they called it a bird, or they called them meadow birds. So it's hard to understand from our perspective, because we say, why not just say plane? And I've had people say that to me, Ira, really stupid people. Why didn't they just say airplane? And I'm thinking, really? So when were those invented?
Well, and you toss in, too, I mean, just as another example, some of the Native American tribes, they describe the different cycles of history that we've gone through. And according to one of them, or actually a couple of them, but, one main one, the Hopi, they say that we have gone through 6 cycles of destruction. On the last cycle of destruction, we were taken underground by the ant people and allowed to live there to be preserved. And we came out of the world, from that inner earth into the outer earth after everything was livable again. Well, when they said ant people, they don't mean actually literally people that look like ants or insects. They mean ant people as in ants live underground. So just like the ants live underground, these people live underground, so we're just going to refer to them as the ant people.
That's right. And there is some relevance to stories such as a hollow earth, but hollow earth could also be living inside of the earth, living inside of the crust 100 miles down, could be interpreted just as literal as living inside of the earth. That doesn't mean you live near the core where there's a sun inside of the core. It just means that you're living in the caverns of the earth, where many cultures had built these massive underground caverns, which have been discovered all over the world, specifically in Europe.
Which we're still building today. If you listen to Richard Sauter, for instance, who I interviewed on my show a few weeks back, wonderful interview. The guy was great. He comes out with the idea that there are these bases, these huge, vast arrays of underground tunnels underneath our feet, thousands of miles worth of tunnels sitting right there right now. These things are right there right now, let alone how was this, thousands of years ago. We have evidence that they were exactly that. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to those of us who look into the past if we don't take a look from the same context at which these people existed. You have to know and understand the history in the context that history took place in order to have a full understanding of what occurred and what they saw.
And even then it becomes somewhat difficult because your bias gets in the way of what you want to believe as opposed to what there actually is in terms of facts and truth to believe.
It really does. It's so hard for us in our modern day technological understanding of things to put ourselves into that mindset. One of the things that I used to do, just as a perspective to this, in order to learn how my ancestors lived, I would go out and actually live how they lived. I would go out and live in the woods for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, months at a time, getting away from everything just so that I could have a perspective and an understanding of what they went through, because I wanted to have a deeper understanding and connection to my past, the people that I came from. So we have to kind of do that kind of thing in order to really get down and dirty with history. And that really is what it comes down to.
And I have to add to that, Ira, that I think even at that point, knowing that you still had a house to come back to or wherever you were living subconsciously is there, so you still can't fully experience it as they did, not having that house to go back to.
Yes, exactly. It does make a difference. You can get yourself at least maybe 80 or so % of the way there, but there's always going to be that, I can still go to the hospital if I fall and break my leg.
Yeah, exactly. So sitting on your bed reading the story that we're talking about tonight about a Planet X with your headset on and your Bluetooth and your iPad and your iPhone and your iPod and all your eyes, and sitting there with all that technology on you, and then thinking, these people are so primitive. They called the moon the moon an egg. They thought the moon was an egg. They thought that asteroid was a dragon. How silly is that? It's really, how silly are we for not trying to at least put ourselves in that position and realize they didn't have a language to describe it. And see, here's the thing: in 100 years, what we see is what we call UFOs, and it's vastly complicated what UFOs in the traditional sense are. UFOs exist, unidentified flying objects. The point that I'm going to make is that some of these objects are seen in very strange geometric shapes. We've seen the cubes near the sun. Some of them are octagons. Some of them are very strange objects, but strange and magical only to us because we don't understand the technology, or we don't understand the spiritual transcendental values of what these objects really are. So in 100 years from now, we might look back on us right here in this year 2015 and think, oh, look how primitive they were. They called them UFOs. We know now that they are, insert whatever the definition is. It's silly. Why would anybody be that stupid to call them UFOs? That's really silly. It's the same exact thing.
1,000 years from now, after a huge amount of history has taken place, or even 2,000 years from now, after a huge amount of history has taken place, they're going to unbury the different Coke machines and figure, hey, these people worshipped this object called Coke. That was their god, Coca-Cola. I wonder what kind of traditions they had associated with it.
He had an enemy called Pepsi. Exactly.
Named Pepsi. Exactly. And look, there was these little sub-gods to it. Coca-Cola also had underneath him associated a god named Nestle. And look at this one
Seraphim.
Here. Exactly. That's how these different types of things begin.
I've always given that example about Harry Potter. I won't give it again, but
I love that one. It is such a perfect example.
Now they're looking. We're building castles and worshiping. In Hogwarts, and that's exactly how history takes place. Now
next thing you know, we're going to have the gods of 50 Shades of Grey. I mean,
you never know. You never know, Ira.
Exactly.
The ritual garb now is everybody has a magic wand going to Hogwarts to worship. The Grand High Priest Wizard. That's how this comes about, and a lot of it comes about, and we have this problem today, as there was back then. At least I assume there was back then. Misunderstandings because people are kept ignorant on purpose and by happenstance. So we don't really think about for a second. Remember that story? And I've got something about remote viewing here about Planet X I'd like to get into in a moment. But that story we heard about these Russian cosmonauts and U.S. astronauts who, before they get on the space shuttle, or before they get on the rocket that launches them into space, they have a holy man, a priest, slap them in the face with water from a cross.
Yes. Yes, indeed. It's like, okay, so we have these modern people, these heights of science, and it's like CERN, the CERN going through all of the different rituals that they go through. These are supposed to be the people who are the highest scientists that we have. And yet they're still tied to these different mythos that they're there. Yeah, it's crazy to me, the weird dichotomy that goes on in the human brain. You were speaking right there about the ignorance part, and I really that's an important thing to understand when it comes to all of this topic, as well as understanding history itself. There were, and still are, to this day, but there were during that time period those who were considered the gatekeepers to knowledge. They were the high priests. They were the ones who were associated with the gods the most. They were given commands by the gods or by God to lead the people into different rituals, different rites, different levels of understanding. So what these priests would do is they would tell the people the stories. They would tell the people, this is what you're supposed to do because God commands it to be done. And the people, not having any understanding otherwise, had to obey the priests because this is what they were educated into doing. If you did not follow what the priest said, you were done. You were killed. You were gone. So you had to do it. Most of the population, 90% minimum of the population could not read, could not write, and had no understanding of the texts that the priests were reading out of. So the priests would literally make stuff up on the fly if they so desired. There have been great examples actually in the past of different religions where the priests would tell the people, hey, God says that you have to give your fatted calf to him as a sacrifice. He wants the 10% of the meat to be burned in the fire to him as a sacrifice. And by the way, the other 90% can go to us to feed ourselves and our families because we're here as this mediator between. And so that is our job. That is our payment to do so. We still see that tradition carried forward today.
It absolutely is, buddy, and that's such a major problem in trying to break away from that, break away from the misconceptions, the biasness, the what you want to believe as opposed to what is actually evident and what you should believe, breaking away from the faith, breaking away from the changing of words and definitions and associations, and then trying to come together and agree on one precise version of reality. Next to impossible.
It really is, because then you come from different cultural biases and everything that goes associating with it. It's a very confusing situation. That's why I said, I think really the only way to get through all of the disinformation and misinformation that's out there, not just from what our modern interpretations or our modern people are trying to do and say regarding this subject, but even the disinformation and misinformation that's been passed on for thousands of years. We're playing this giant game of telephone with it all, and you know how the game of telephone goes. By the time that you get to this end point, it is a completely different story than it was at the beginning. You have to go as far back into ground zero as you possibly can. Divide by zero all the way, whatever it takes. Get yourself as far away from all of this modern stuff and go right back into the base core of things. Take it from the beginning forward, and that's the only way that you're going to get yourself through and have an understanding of what it was that they were trying to say.
That's right. You have to go directly to the source. If you're just joining us, I am Ryan Gable. I am here with my guest host today, Ira Robinson, who is host of Open Eyes Radio on the L&M Radio Network, one of the many networks The Secret Teachings is on. And we are going to take a short break. When we come back, we will be talking more about what we call Planet X, Planet of the Unknown, the 10th planet, the 12th planet, Nibiru, Wormwood, or Nabaru, the planet of the crossing, or the planet to be crossed, meaning, I think Nabaru, was it Nabara, meaning we cross, coming from the Sumerian word Nabara, meaning the moving light gate. We'll be talking more about that, specifically remote viewing and what some remote viewers have found in viewing the concepts of extraterrestrial life and what those extraterrestrials supposedly told them in relationship to an outside planetary body coming into our solar system. So all of that plus the Destroyer coming up right here on The Secret Teachings. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes. How can we so arrogantly believe that we are at the very cutting edge of human and social evolution? How can we truly understand ourselves when we dilute our very nature with distractions that only seem to entertain rather than educate the human brain and mind? If you wish to explore these concepts and much more, you can tune into The Secret Teachings, Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the L&M Radio Network. You can also download and listen to past episodes for free by visiting our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. Remember that the highest wisdom is silent fact, and that wisdom is not bestowed, it is achieved.
You're out to get the truth. You're looking for the truth, and you're going no matter where it leads, no matter what it leads to. Everybody's Gary here, the Mad Martian, and do The Secret Teachings.
Are you tired of shows about bogus photographs of guinea pigs on Mars or fake photos of Bigfoot in the woods? How about fake paranormal shows that don't actually discuss the paranormal or believe that every object they see in the sky must be extraterrestrial? How about big networks that use alternative news to promote their mainstream agenda, political shows that are one-sided, or shows that claim to know exactly what is happening for ratings, even though an event just broke in the news? Me too. At The Secret Teachings, we are not like any of those other shows. We cover any topic from symbolism to ancient history and from health to the occult, including the paranormal, but we don't just jump on board with every photograph of an orb or sample of Bigfoot hair. We have no political affiliations, no religious backing, and no financial backing. We want proof, and not someone's word. If you want proof, or at least a different perspective from a host that can both accept or deny all points of view and all pieces of evidence, without holding onto a preconditioned belief or looking for evidence to support a prior conclusion, someone who can even admit when they're wrong, then check out The Secret Teachings radio show. Airtimes and free downloads are available by visiting www.thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and I hope that you will join us. Namaste.
This is Scott Wolter, host of America on Earth, author of The Hooked X and Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers, and you're listening to The Secret Teachings.
What, are you going to read People magazine and eat at Wendy's till the end of time? Take a fucking chance.
The physical world we see with our brains is truly an illusion, an energetic expression of consciousness. We see less than 1% of what exists within white visible light, yet profess to understand the nature of existence. A physical matter made of hollow particles perceived as physical only by our DNA, brain, and five-sense decoding system, decoding a series of biological zeros and ones in the forms of A, C, T, and G. Occultists call this the Grand Illusion, and this is the name of my first book, The Grand Illusion: Slaves to Perception. My name is Ryan Gable, and I'm the author of The Grand Illusion and host of the radio show The Secret Teachings. It is my perspective that we are all slaves to perception, programmed to react rather than to think critically, programmed to consume, to mock those who are different than you, and to outcast others that are different than the acceptable social norms. In the book The Grand Illusion, I have broken down what we call reality into 3 parts. In part 1, I explore the big questions of who we are, where did we come from, and of course religious teachings rooted in astronomy, commonly known as astrotheology. In the second part of The Grand Illusion, I explore the history of central banks and world wars, international networks of child abusers, geoengineering of our environment, secret societies, UFOs, and the paranormal. In the third part of The Grand Illusion, I explore political assassinations, symbols and sacred geometry, and how, with the evidence I've provided, my belief is that events like 9/11 2001 and the 2012 London Olympics were mass energy rituals. The book is over 700 pages and filled with years of my own research, which I believe is separated from others in this field by the way that I approach such topics, such as UFOs, how some will just simply either believe or automatically disbelieve, choosing a predetermined, pre-conclusive side in that argument, when in fact I believe that the alien myth is some type of cover for something else, and we'd explore that in The Grand Illusion. How secret societies are not a group of men, sometimes women, worshiping the devil, that in fact they are remnants of ancient mystery schools. And of course, my rare coverage of Gaza and the international network of pedophiles. But regardless of your opinions or beliefs, The Grand Illusion has something for everyone, including an entire chapter on health, my own personal experiences and how to eat non-GMO, information on hidden ingredients and deceptive labels from companies, as well as the ingredients and ways to opt out of vaccinations legally. Now, I could tell you that my book, The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, will change the world or help you to survive the end times or get you closer to God, but that's exactly the type of deceptive mentality that I attempt to expose in the book, living without fear and instead being informed. If you would like a copy of The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, you can purchase the copy at thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info. Click on the Shop tab, and you have your choice of softcover or PDF. There is no regulation or editing of what I wrote in this 700-page book. And if you'd like a free sample, you can email me at rdgable@yahoo.com. That's over 700 pages, 3 parts, and 13 chapters. Visit thesecretteachings.info and click on the Shop tab today to order your copy of The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception. The book will also be available from Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Don't be afraid, be informed.
You are listening to The Secret Teachings. For more information, you can visit thesecretteachings.info, where you can find a full list of downloadable episodes, top news articles, links to our Facebook page, and ways to catch the show no matter where you're located. For questions, comments, or requests, you can email us at rdgable, that's rdgable@yahoo.com. Stay tuned.
So far tonight, we've been talking about Planet X, the planet of the unknown, or the 10th planet. Could also be the 12th planet if you factor in the sun and moon, but minus Pluto, and it kind of creates a little bit of confusion. We've been talking about that confusion tonight on The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and the other part of that we is Ira Robinson, who is host of Open Eyes Radio and some other shows such as Adventures in Autism on the L&M Radio Network, one of our primary networks. If you go to our website, thesecretteachings.info, you can find a link to all of those other networks, as well as to an archive where you can download all of our past episodes for free. You can also find links to purchase 1 or 2 of my books, The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, or False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. All proceeds from the books, as well as donations through PayPal at the top right on the website, thesecretteachings.info, go to helping me to fund The Secret Teachings and to bring you more information, as I don't just jump on a mic, open my mouth, and let whatever come out. I get on the microphone after doing extensive amounts of research into whatever the topic might be for the week. That includes reading, taking a lot of time, taking notes, and writing that information down. So it is a task but it is a task that I am up for. And regardless of those donations, I will continue to bring you the Secret Teachings at least once a week. The more donations we get and or the more books we sell, and we will have more Secret Teachings coming to you on the weekend. If you don't already know, the Secret Teachings airs every Saturday and every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on the LNM radio network. We are also on Planet Paranormal and some other networks that host us in their archives. Our archive, again, can be found at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. So, now that we know where the website is, now that we know what the topics have been about for tonight, we are going to dive a little bit deeper in to the Nibiru, Planet X, Planet of the Crossing issue that so many people are fascinated with. And continuing to join me for this final segment is Ira Robinson. Ira, before we took a break, we were talking, of course, about Planet X, and we were talking about the disinformation, purposeful disinformation, and misinformation that surrounds these topics, and specifically how ancient cultures would name their gods after planets, and name planets and gods, use that same name to name kings, or at least associate their king or their leader with. So it creates a lot of confusion because you say, well, is Nibiru real? And then you say, well, Nibiru was a ruler in this year, so of course Nibiru was real. But is it the same Nibiru? You're talking about a planet compared to a guy, compared to a god. It's mythology, it's tangible, it's intangible. There's so many different aspects. It creates a lot of confusion, doesn't it?
Oh, it most certainly does. It's just like with the idea of Jesus being associated not only with Jesus, but with Mithra, with, on and on and on. It's insane the amount of actual data that's there that you have to sift through to try to find where the origination of it all is. And you may not even be able to get there. There's so much that we're not even being told, or that we're not being given when it comes to these things that we see there during that time period.
You do have to keep sifting. You have to continue to do. They have to shift, and you have to shift, sift and shift. Because if you don't shift your perspective, you're going to be left in the past with these old concepts such as, well, the earth must be the center of everything because humans are a creation of God, and God created humans in the image of God, which means that we are all perfect, even though we are far from perfect in physical, emotional, and mental states. So, with that being said, you have to shift that perspective to see that you're not the center of everything, that you are just as minute yet important as everything else in existence. Everything comes from the same source. So, in the sense that you are important to everything, you are also unimportant in the same right. And it's not necessarily that you're unimportant in a negative, derogatory sense. It is two parts of the whole, and without having a perspective on both, it becomes very difficult to have a full understanding of what reality is all about. Otherwise, you fall into some predetermined, rigid belief system that promotes only one side of that argument. And the religious arguments and the political arguments are all very masculine in nature, suppressing the absolute creativity of the female, and this creates a lot of problems and creates this very rigid, distorted reality that we perceive to exist in. So we have to shift that perception, Ira. And one of the best ways I think we can shift our perception, perhaps, is a physical shifting, or at least a spiritual shifting, in the sense of remote viewing. I know you've tried this before. We actually spoke with Courtney Brown last week on the program about aliens on Iapetus, and we talked to Courtney about the specifics of remote viewing, what they found on Iapetus, the moon of Saturn that kind of looks like the Death Star, along with Saturn's other moon, Mimas. And you told me that you've tried remote viewing before. So
I have, yep.
What's the deal with remote viewing? Can you remote view a Planet X?
Well, I think it's possible to do so. The problem with that concept, though, or the problem with that idea, is that when you are remote viewing, you have to have a target in mind, or a specific target in mind. When you have that as the baseline of where you have to go from, not knowing where Planet X is or exactly what it is, that leaves a wide array of things open.
Lots of possibilities.
So, yes, and so I think what might end up occurring. See, okay, let me get into why I think that remote viewing works. Let's start from that, and we can go from there. I think remote viewing works by us accessing what I come to call the universal consciousness field, or other people refer to as the Akashic records and that sort of thing. It's all one and the same, basically. In this field, there is the it's like the universal hard drive. All the data of everything that has ever occurred and will ever occur is stored in this field, this informational field. Okay. And by remote viewing, basically, we're hooking up to that hard drive with our computer systems, i.e. our consciousnesses and our bodies, and we are pulling the data in from that hard drive. So when we are remote viewing, we are essentially just writing down the data that we're getting off of that hard drive, or drawing it, or whatever method you're using to remote view. So when it comes to that as the baseline of how it works, if you were to try to remote view Planet X, if you don't have like the specific coordinates in mind or the specific target item in mind, I think what you're going to end up doing is actually pulling in data of what is in existence as far as the idea of Planet X is concerned. So you're going to get information about this disinformation, basically, is what it comes down to, because so much information and data is out there now regarding this that is false data. The remote viewing is going to end up getting false data as well. Does that make sense?
It makes plenty of sense. And then depending on how much credit you give to remote viewing, then that disinformation or that misinformation could become factual based on the credibility of remote viewing. So that could create a much different problem. It's just kind of like you're just reabsorbing the deception, and then you're rebranding it as truth. It's like meat at the store that's kind of brown on the underside, and they just flip it over and they wrap it up in plastic and sell it as new, even though it's it's
and they'll put enzymes on top
terrible.
of it to make it look pinker.
Right, exactly. That's basically all that it is.
If somebody like Courtney Brown or Ed Dames or one of the big names in remote viewing was to do a remote viewing of Planet X and come out with this kind of information, so many people would latch onto it and say, well, this has to be the truth because these guys came out with it, and that's what they claim, and they're the best at remote viewing. So that it would just lead to so much other problems on top of it.
Far too biased is what is what those problems consist of. Now, I remember talking at the beginning of the show about the Destroyer and in association with Planet X, and how Dimitri and we used to do the show together before he died in a car crash. Dimitri and he turned me on to the Colburn Bible originally, and we had studied the Destroyer aspects of it before, and we had done a show on it. Not as in depth as today's show, just talking basically about the standard concepts that most people know about. And what happened was after he died, I actually got a call from his wife. She texted me, his ex-wife rather, and she's a very spiritual person, meditation, and she tries to channel different beings and whatnot. She's very much into that. And I actually, to give her a little credibility, I had an experience one night that I saw as some type of spiritual abduction. I think I've told that story before. And she actually texted me that night. It was close to midnight and said, "Are you okay? I feel like something just happened to you." So she was very on top of that. I only met her one time, and she told me that Dimitri actually came to her in a type of kind of like a spiritual vision, and just to assure her that he was okay, and that he chose to reside. His soul chose to reside on whatever his interpretation of Planet X was. I thought that was somewhat interesting. To take it a step further, there was a study done in 1996 by the American Association of Remote Viewers, and they took 7 remote viewers who were all somewhat, you could say, experts. They were very experienced. They've done remote viewing sessions before, and what they did was they took these remote viewers and they had them look at a series of questions associated with the UFO phenomena, such as what are UFOs, what technologies do they use, is that technology on Earth today, do humans have contact with them, they're UFOs in the hands of the government, and so on and so forth. Well, reading through a lot of the data, and this is actually reproduced in Jim Marrs's book, Alien Agenda, Investigating the Extraterrestrial Presence Among Us. Jim Marrs, I'd like to get him back on the show again, actually. And he's talking in this book, he's not even talking, he's talking about it originally, and then he just lays the information out of what these remote viewers found in their sessions, because all of this was strictly documented. So, in 1996, Ira, there were 2 specific reports that were released through the American Remote Viewers Association. And here is essentially what they found. And it had nothing to do with Planet X. They weren't trying to view a Planet X, and they don't ever use the words Planet X, Wormwood, or Nibiru, or anything like that. There was one remote viewer who was asked the question about what is the aliens' purpose here. Here's what his response was. He said, quote, "They are here to help us. The Greys said a planet is about to make an appearance in our solar system within the next 60 years and will wreak havoc here. This time this thing is going to pass on the side of the sun facing us, and the sun won't be there to protect us." So 1996, within the next 60 years, so about 1954, he says that these gray alien species, or at least some of them, are here to protect us from an object, a planet specifically, that is supposed to appear in our solar system and wreak havoc, as he is quoted saying. Now, taking that information and moving completely ahead to a different question entirely outside of what this previous remote viewer was talking about. And this question was, describe any interaction between Earth governments and visitors beginning 100 years in the past and moving 200 years into the future. So very, very much in with that 60-year time constraint, if you will. And what this remote viewer found is something relatively similar. He says, quote, "The changes," and he's talking about changes in terms of meeting of extraterrestrials and governments and whatnot. "The changes is saying the tall, skinny gray are going to affect the planet." He says that roughly, and get this, about 25,000 revolutions around the sun, the Earth is pelted by large stones from the sky. So it's kind of like that 65 billion year extinction event, or those couple hundred-year earthquakes in California. Jim Marrs says he must be talking about meteors or asteroids, but the man who remote viewed this idea of governments working with aliens, had no relation to Planet X or anything like that, says that there's a planet that crosses the orbits of other planets in our solar system, and that according to the Greys, it causes lots of problems for Earth and other planets. This thing apparently is bigger than Earth, and apparently it's like a hologram of the orbit of this thing is cutting across the plane of the orbits of the other planets in our solar system, is what the remote viewer saw, kind of like a hologram. And as it cuts through the orbit of other planets, it causes havoc gravitationally, and perhaps was also what crashed into Tiamat, creating the asteroid belt so many millions and millions of years ago. Now, the most interesting point about all of this, Ira, those are the two remote viewing questions and the two remote viewers that answered the questions, is that when asking the extraterrestrials in these remote viewing sessions, particularly the tall, skinny, gray being, what humans should do about these cataclysms, the being says, and this is what Jim Marrs writes in Alien Agenda, quote, "We must build underground facilities for themselves and their people. This is what the human race should do." Problem is, Ira, that we built underground facilities. There's no question about that. They were actually, there's a news article that I have here from Yahoo Finance and from Business Insider saying secret tunnel used to send intel from China to the Soviet Union, and this was just discovered, and it shows a tunneling system all throughout the Soviet Union, all the way into Asia, into China, to smuggle information. And these are man-made constructed tunnels. There's a lot of tunnels that are not necessarily man-made, that were constructed maybe by natural formations. There are some that were constructed thousands of millions of years ago by man or whatever else maybe constructed them on this planet, beings from another solar system, another galaxy, another, I don't know, whatever you'll have, another dimension. But nevertheless, these tunnel systems are there. In the United States, Canada, I'm sure parts of, in Russia, in China, there are underground systems being constructed now, and they've been going on for many years, even before the First and Second World War. And they're constructing these underground facilities as massive cities with thousands of miles of tunnel, as you mentioned earlier. So, in relation to the remote viewing of these planetary bodies, and the recommendation, supposedly, from these extraterrestrials to build these tunnels, how much does that have to do with Planet X and Nibiru? And I know that's a lot of information, but whatever you gathered, I'd really appreciate your take on this, Ira.
Okay, well, let's start off with another news story that was released just a couple of months ago, where scientists were able to determine that about 50,000 or so years ago, a rogue planet came through our solar system and wreaked havoc. And that they have found evidence of it, that it is actually now quite a distance away from us, but that it is definitely there, and it did definitely come through. So that's one example of exactly this type of occurrence happening. It's happened before, and it definitely can happen again, and I think it will happen again. As far as the validity of the remote viewers doing this type of thing, I think that there is definitely validity to it. They weren't asking specifically as far as like a Planet X type of thing was concerned, so I don't think that the lack of target that I was speaking about earlier would occur with that. They were actually specifically asking for other targeted things, and that's the information that came through. So I think that it is possible that they did see something along these lines, and that something along these lines can occur. What I will toss out kind of as an alternative thought to all of this is that we do have an understanding that there are other dimensions that are involved in our universe. Okay. And I come from the baseline of understanding that kind of like the M theory is concerned, that for every event that occurs, every decision that is made, there's another dimension that is created that will follow through with each decision. So the fact that you had vanilla ice cream instead of chocolate ice cream created a whole new dimension, basically, right? That's kind of like my baseline of understanding. But so what I will say in kind of not necessarily rebuttal, but I guess in addition to what you're describing with all of this, is that it could very well be a thing that they were also seeing things that were occurring in these other dimensions as well. So that is one possibility.
That's not directly related to our reality.
To our reality, right. And that basically how I look at things is this. When you make a prediction, or when a prediction is made, it is valid at the time of prediction. So if somebody, a valid predictor, in other words, somebody that has come to exercise their muscle fully, and they have, grown in power with this type of thing, if they have become very good at doing these predictions, we have two problems that occur. The prediction is valid at the time of prediction. So the moment that it's predicted, they're getting the information from the field, and they are seeing what is going to occur. Okay. The problem is that the further out the prediction is, and the more people that are involved in it, the less likely that prediction is to occur, because more things can happen that will cause us basically to go into an entirely different dimensional way of being. That prediction is still valid for, there will still be a dimension that takes place in, yes, but that doesn't necessitate that that's going to be the one that we have, that we, the ones that are conscious in this time and place, are going to go through. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I was actually going to bring up a very similar example, and this doesn't let any of the fraudulent psychics off the hook, if you will. But
no, you notice how I put that?
Yeah.
The ones that are valid with it, Right.
And you're exactly right. There's a lot of psychics that make predictions, and that's crazy. And otherwise, maybe if the prediction wasn't made, maybe it would have come true, if that makes any sense, because maybe you would have acted differently prior to hearing that information. But when the prediction is made, it can be accurate. Decisions and choices you make and other people make changes the course, which, comparing that to the macrocosm, just because through a series of patterns, this object might come into our solar system every 3,600 years, on estimate, not an absolute fact, because something could have happened in that 3,600-year orbit. That's a long time, especially for humans in our perception. And thinking about it could have come into contact with another planet and been completely thrown off course. I mean,
Yes.
do people really think that if this object came into our solar system, wreaked havoc, destroyed Tiamat, if it was the same planetary body, but just go with me for a second, and left our solar system, supposedly coming back in 3,600 years, that if it came into contact with another sphere or planetary body somewhere or anything, an asteroid belt or the ring of a planet, that it wouldn't drastically alter its course, and it may never come back into our solar system.
You're exactly on the right track. Think about it this way. It could have been coming in at a 3,600-year cycle all along, but then during this last cycle, it whacked into Tiamat, caused the asteroid field to come into being, caused all this destruction to occur, and from that point forward, now it's on a completely different trajectory because it slammed into that planet and was thrown completely off course. It may have been a valid orbit up until that point in time, but once that point in time happened, boom, everything from that point forward changes.
That's right. Have you ever seen the space movies? Anybody seen Apollo 13? You know how they use the little thrusters, the little tiny just to move like a fraction of an inch?
It does not take much.
It doesn't take much. So by moving just that much can completely change your trajectory to a point of entering Earth's atmosphere at the right angle and not burning up or exploding before you even reach the lower form of the atmosphere. So, by looking at it in that way, look at a planetary body. Thinking that a planetary body can go in a 3,600-year elliptical orbit, not strike anything outside of our solar system and come back in on a consistent basis is giving a lot of credibility to this, what we could call a theory about a Planet X and this orbit based on the work of certain people like Zecharia Sitchin, who's wasn't necessarily a big proponent of what he translated in the first place. The man didn't even believe in the beings that he translated. I think he told David Icke and some other people that he didn't even believe in these reptilian type figures and these aliens. So
he didn't
even believe in it. He was just translating it and kind of going along with the story and making stuff up as he went.
Yep.
So anyway, with all that being said, Ira, we are coming up on the final about 10 to 15 minutes. So in that final, I know it went fast, didn't it?
Yeah.
In that final little bit of time, because we've covered some really great topics today, and this show is going to go down in history as being one of my favorites, I think. Which it builds up almost every show is my favorite, but so it's in the top like 500. This next part comes from the Book of Manuscripts. This comes from the famous Kolbrin Bible. It's from the Book of Manuscripts, and it's from I'll open it here. Chapter 3 of the Book of Manuscripts, The Destroyer, Part 1. I've got a couple of places marked off in here just to kind of give you a description. And this basically describes the plagues that struck Egypt, or at least the destruction from above, the plagues that came from God. God is above, a heaven, extraterrestrial. You could look at it in that manner as well. And it explains the exodus, essentially, of the people out of Egypt and the Pharaoh and his military pursuit, the parting of the Red Sea, and everything, all in relation to this object called the Destroyer. And I'll go ahead and read you the first section from Chapter 3 of the Book of Manuscripts, The Destroyer. Man 3:2 is the verse. Says, quote, "It raged across the sky in the days of wrath, and this was its likeness. It was as a billowing cloud of smoke enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb. Its mouth was an abyss from which came fire, smoke, and hot cinders," which is one of the reasons they called it a dragon breathing fire. So from the mouth of this object was fire, was flame, was smoke, and hot cinders. Cinders, by the way, is where Cinderella came from, a story of the death of the man and the female searching for her husband, Isis, in Egypt, and that's why they called her Cinderella, because Isis covered herself in like a black substance and dressed in all black to mourn her husband, as a side note. Chapter 3, Man 3:4, the verse 3:4, said, "When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed, and all living things engulfed. Water will be swallowed up by the land, and seas will boil." Now, that verse in particular, Ira, I sound like a preacher now, but that verse in particular really kind of paints a picture for me, and what I subscribe to it is not magic. I subscribe some type of planetary body or some type of massive asteroid coming into very close proximity to Earth and messing with the atmosphere of the Earth, messing with the wobble of the Earth, and creating a massive fire that maybe was created by the impact of smaller rocks or objects that were along with this body, this planetary body, or this asteroid. What do you think of that? That could have been what moved mountains and destroyed trees and engulfed all living things in flames.
Oh yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, you think about it this way: if a planetary body was to come close to Earth, there's going to be all kinds of volcanic activity that happens. Our entire atmosphere would change. It really would be possible. The atmosphere itself would be compressed, and that would cause things to become.
It would essentially light the
thicker.
sky on fire.
Yeah, it would indeed. And this again goes with the idea as well that I said earlier about the exoplanet that they discovered that was having its atmosphere basically being burned off by its own sun. It would look exactly like what's being described here.
Absolutely. And if we continue on in the Book of Manuscripts, chapter number 3, The Destroyer, part 1, the verse Man 3:5 pretty much describes what we are discussing here, Ira. It says, "The heavens will burn brightly and redly. There will be a copper hue over the face of the land, followed by a day of darkness. A new moon will appear and break up and fall." That day of darkness could be the amount of ash and debris blasted into the atmosphere that was the result of an impact of this object or several objects that followed it in its orbit, wherever this object was coming from, whether it was a planet or an asteroid. Verse 3:6 goes on to say, "The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer and will seek refuge within dens in the earth." I thought this was very important because they say they will seek refuge within dens in the earth. Sounds very similar to the construction of these underground bases.
Yes, sir.
And it sounds very similar to going back to this time period biblically, the stories of, stories first of all of demons living inside of the earth, but also perhaps beings living inside of the earth that were not from Earth, perhaps from Mars, so they lived inside of the earth because it was more habitable to where they came from. And also these ancient stories about floods and people went underground in the mountains to escape the floods, and this probably brought about a great cataclysm, which is being described here in the Kolbrin, and they hid within the earth.
Yep.
The book says they will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer. The breath was flames, and they will be consumed in flames. It would be so hot that it would probably vaporize anything. I saw a show one time about asteroids, and they say that these things are some of them are so big, and when they come into the atmosphere, they can strike before you even really realize what you're seeing. The heat and the intensity from this object being burnt in the atmosphere can be so hot, it could actually not only light the air on fire, it could scorch like a nuclear explosion land, humans, flora, fauna, everything for hundreds of miles before it even impacts the earth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There has been evidence to show that exactly is what occurs. And in fact, probably what ended up occurring on Mars, for instance, the massive impact that occurred there at the Olympus Mons crater, you see that this impact may have been so vastly huge that it obliterated the entire atmosphere off of Mars.
Oh, exactly. And that is exactly what we're talking about here in this case. As next verse is very intriguing. I didn't have it marked, but I remember reading this before. I thought it was pretty interesting to share with you. It says in the Book of Manuscripts, chapter 3, verse Man 3:7, "Thus it was in the days of heavenly wrath." So heavenly wrath we get associated with God and the plagues, which have gone, and thus it will be in the days of doom when it comes again. So they're saying it will return. The destroyer will return. "The times of its coming and going are known unto the wise. These are the signs and times which shall precede the destroyer's return. 110 generations shall pass into the west, and nations will rise and fall." Now, keeping in mind, this was somewhat of like 3,500 years ago. 110 generations shall pass into the west, and nations will rise and fall. Men will fly in the air as birds, and swim in the seas as fish, planes, submarines. Men will talk peace one with another. Hypocrisy and deceit shall have their day. Women,
oh God,
yeah, women will be as men, and men as women. Passion will be a plaything of man. Just absolutely.
You look around the world right now, you see this is a description of exactly what we have right now.
Consumed by material possessions, passion, pornography, cars, homes, eating. Eating is a sport in this country.
It really is, yes.
Passion will be a plaything of man. It will not be something that should be regarded as something that is sacred. Now, the 4th chapter of the Book of Manuscripts is the second part of the Destroyer, and if you'd like more information on this, there are many other verses that I don't have time to read to you, nor do I need to. It's just extra information. And verse 4:2 from chapter 4 of the Book of Manuscripts says, "This is the thing which will be seen. This is the terror your eyes will behold. This is the form of destruction that will rush upon you. There will be a great body of fire." Thinking about this as an asteroid or something. "There will be a great body of fire, the glowing head with many mouths and eyes ever changing. Terrible teeth will be seen in formless mouths, and a fearful dark belly will glow redly from fires inside." Now, again, remembering the other verse we read about men flying in the air as birds, you think, why didn't they just say airplanes? They didn't have a word for airplanes.
Yeah.
So when
no language.
Exactly. So when they say that this object has a glowing head with many mouths and eyes ever changing, that could be the color of the fire. That could be the color of the chemicals burning off. It's not necessarily it's an actual dragon with terrible teeth. As the Colburn says.
We have at this point in time 300,000 more words in the English language than there was during Shakespeare's time. So just as an example, language changes drastically over the years.
So everything changes so drastically that it changes it almost in a sense changes the truth in a way because not literally, because back in those times, that's when they would say men would fly in the air as birds. That was their truth. That was their description. But to us today, that doesn't make any sense. That seems like just some weird quotation. Why
some weird telekinetic psychic superpower or something like that?
Well, why didn't they just use planes? Well, they didn't have planes. Okay, so if you go into this a little bit deeper, I know we're running out of time somewhat. The chapter 4 Book of Manuscripts says that great boulders will be hurled down upon men, crushing them into red powder, specifically red powder. Going into chapter number 4 still, the final verse of chapter 4, it says, "As the great salt waters rise up in its train and roaring torrents pour towards the land," I don't know, tsunamis and great cataclysmic waves caused by a massive body interacting with Earth gravitationally, "even the heroes among mortal men will be overcome with madness. Men will cry out in their madness, 'Oh, whatever being there is, save us from this tall form of terror. Save us from the gray dew of death.'" Chapter 5 of The Destroyer, the final part of the Destroyer story in the Colburn Bible, says that they call it the doom shape, which they call the Destroyer.
So wait a minute. I don't mean to interrupt you, but you just said the gray goo of death?
The gray dew of death.
The gray dew of death. Do you know, that sounds pretty much like a perfect description of what we see in the chemtrails right now. You look at what's happened in Seattle, Washington, for instance, or all of Washington. They've had falling on them a weird grayish, dewy substance.
Really? In Seattle?
Yeah. In Seattle, but also all of Washington State has been experiencing this over the past couple of years. I'll send you a couple of the articles that I've run across with it, so you can maybe put it up on as a link with this show. It's really interesting. That cued me right in there. You know?
Absolutely. We'll get that up on the website if you can send that to me.
Yeah, I'll take a look for it.
Alrighty, sounds good, Ira. Chapter 5 of The Destroyer, they call it the doom shape in Egypt. It was seen in all the lands thereabouts. In color it was bright and fiery, in appearance changing and unstable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like water bubbling into a pool from an underground supply, and all men agree it was a most fearsome sight. So they say that the destroyer, called the Doom Shape, was seen in all of the lands, or at least all of the lands that were known about at that time. They say it was not, actually this is specific, which is interesting, it was not a great comet or a loosened star, being more like a fiery body of flame. So that actually puts a little bit of confusion into this story, because if it wasn't a comet, as I've always said, it was still a type of comet, maybe it was an asteroid or some other type of planetary body. They say it was not a comet and it was not a loosened star, but then we have to assume that what they defined as a comet or a loosened star is exactly what we define as a comet or loosened star. Chapter 5, Book of Manuscripts, the Destroyer, verse 5-2, says its movements on high were slow, below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face hid it. Now, we were talking in those quotations from the remote viewers who said that the sun will not be here the next time this object comes into our solar system, which means that the first time it did, the sun protected us from an even greater cataclysm. These aliens supposedly said in the RV sessions, the remote viewing sessions, that the sun will not be there to protect us this time. And specifically here, in the Kolbrin Bible, it says that this object hid close to the sun, or remained close to the sun, whose face it hid. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed as it passed along its course. It caused, just like I said at the beginning of the show, death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with gray cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became mottled with sores, which part of the plagues in Egypt, you could say they came from God, they came from heaven. Well, they did. It was the heavenly spheres and not necessarily a physical, tangible form of God as we would like to interpret. So, with all of that being said, the Kolbrin goes into describing how the fish in the river died, the waters were polluted, there were worms, insects, and reptiles that sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Great gusts of wind brought swarms of locusts which covered the sky. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the planet. And that was described in the 6th chapter, The Dark Days, verse 6-4. Now, with all of that being said, that sounds like the plagues of Egypt to me, Ira. What do you think?
It does, most certainly. I think that if you look at the way that history works, history is written by the victors. We see that a lot of the things that were written in the Bible, for instance, in relation to that time period, were probably them reinterpreting events and putting their own spin on it to make
God
it
did it
as if God did it. Okay,
exactly.
So I mean that's one thing at the forefront of all of this. One thing I will add into this is that
we've only got about 3 minutes here, so go ahead.
Okay, I'll make it as quick as I can. If you go into the archives on my website, OpenEyesNetwork.com, I've done a couple of shows where I've had my guest Maggie Hart. She's one of my frequent guests. Good friend of mine. She's a psychic. She has kind of really high connections. Both of us have over the years experienced what we have termed the visions of the end, although it's not the end. And a lot of what you're describing with all of this goes right into what we've seen as this vision, this weird vision that we've had of this kind of end that we're coming to. So just for the listeners' sake, if you guys are interested in more information, you could go to my website and check out my archives, listen to the shows there. You guys might see some things that are kind of correlating into this as well. Now, I'll toss into what you're describing here. One other thing that I'd like to give as far as informational purposes is concerned to think about with all of this and the way that things can be interpreted. If you look in the book of Revelations, it talks about wormwood coming into earth and polluting or turning bitter 1/3 of the waters of the earth. If you look at what has occurred right here and right now on our modern day times, you can see that Chernobyl has caused all kinds of issues after its reactor went hokey. Chernobyl is the Russian word for wormwood. What they may have been describing actually is that this situation was occurring and that this pattern of things is actually what we need to watch out for. Right after Chernobyl happened, what do we have? We have Fukushima, which is now polluting basically 1/3 of all of the waters on the planet. So this event, this radiation event or something like that, could have been what they were describing as wormwood. They came up with the term wormwood because it was the interpretation of the Chernobyl wormwood, so on and so forth. So just to toss out there for informational purposes, I guess, there's more to this story than what people are really having an understanding of. Go back into your history and start from the beginning and see what you can get as far as how can you see what's happening now today in relation to what they saw back then. And how much of today is predicted by those things. It really is a pretty interesting story that we've been through as human beings.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Planet X, the planet of the unknown, planet of the crossing, meaning to cross or we cross, out of the Nabaru Sumerian word. Also, Nibiru or wormwood, as Ira just described. We talked about the destroyer on today's show. And at the beginning of the program, I also talked a little bit about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about the TPP, but we ran out of time. And there are some other news stories I will mention very quickly, and we will get into them next week on the program. The first one is Cosby. Bill Cosby admits supplying drugs to women in pursuit of sex, so we'll get into more of that as that story unfolds. Also, Nicolas Sarkozy, president of France, taking millions of dollars from the supposed dictator of Libya, according to the London Telegraph, and we can get into more of that next week, as well as FBI agents searching Subway spokesman Jared Fogel's home and his foundation, in association somewhat loosely with Subway. The man that headed his association, and I don't even have his name right now, he was arrested for child pornography, and now Jared is, I guess, under the same implications. So once again, let's teach kids how to be healthy and fit and how to lose weight, and we'll set up an organization to do that, and we'll use it to, I guess in this case, maybe they didn't, but use it to abuse children and to take advantage of children. So we'll get into that story more, as well as how antibiotics change your body. All of that and much, much more coming up next week on The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. And for Ira Robinson, thank you for being on the show today, Ira. I really appreciate it. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Go to the website, download today's show, Planet X and the Destroyer, and then do the research and do the math and stop letting people tell you what to think, including myself. Connect the dots between seemingly unconnected people, places, and events in the world that seems so complex will actually begin to make sense. Let's start over from zero with a blank piece of paper. Auf Wiedersehen and Namaste.
Certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me.
The leader in talk radio on the internet, right here on K98Talk.com.
When our water heater broke down last month, it was a nightmare. It took 5 hours for the plumber to show up, and he charged us a couple of $100 just to come out. Then it cost another $1,800 to put in the new water heater. By the time it was all said and done, I felt like I'd been taken. But what else could I do?
The smartest thing you can do is get a home warranty from American Residential Warranty. Their home warranties pay to repair or replace all your major appliances when they break, and they will break, and at the worst possible time. Call American Residential Warranty right now for free information on home warranties starting at just pennies a day. Don't wait for your refrigerator to stop running or your ceiling fans to stop turning. Call American Residential Warranty right now. Ask how you can save up to 50% on washer and dryer coverage. Just call 1-800-513-6154. That's 1-800-513-6154. Again, 1-800-513-6154. Call now.
Tired of paying outrageous prices for Viagra? Well, we have great news for you. Now you can finally get Viagra at huge discounts. Healthy Man allows you to save up to $500 on Viagra. Why pay U.S. pharmacy prices of $15 per pill or more when you can get Viagra for less than $3 a pill? Call today and get 40 Viagra pills for only $99. This can cost as much as $600 at your local pharmacy. You can't afford not to call us. If you want Viagra at the lowest prices, never pay $15 a pill pharmacy prices again. Get Viagra for less than $3 a pill. Call 1-800-516-7602 today and save up to $500 and get 40 pills for just $99. Healthy Man is fast, easy, and affordable. Operators are waiting at 1-800-516-7602 to take your call right now. Call 1-800-516-7602. That's 1-800-516-7602. Again, 1-800-516-7602.